Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, members, so that's in public session, so you're all very welcome to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. Normal housekeeping, I would advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I would advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to Assembly Wi-Fi and the password details for that are available in the gallery rules. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I have apologies from Cara, and we also have Robbie joining us remotely today. So just moving on to item 2 then, which is Chairperson's business. So just a couple of things here. Item 2.1 in your packs there is the record of the informal meeting with Retail NI, where they provided us with their briefing in response to the school uniforms consultation. So I think that left us with plenty of material that I think we will factor into our considerations once that legislation's in front of us and we're going through the committee stage. But I'm content at this stage to note if everyone is agreed. Okay, a couple of other bits, I think, just with Robbie joining us remotely today. I think it probably now would be just an appropriate time to note that this is sadly Robbie's last meeting with us here as a member of the Education Committee. He is moving on to bigger and better things in Dara. So Robbie, it really just, I just wanted to put formally on record my thanks for all your work and contributions in this mandate, and obviously you've sat on this committee in a previous mandate as well, and I know you've built up a reputation as a real champion of the rights of children and young people. So I think it is just important to put on record our thanks for your work on the committee, and to wish you all the very best in your new role as chair on the Agriculture and Environment Committee. But if you want to say anything at this stage, I'm happy to give you the floor, Robbie.
Former friend.
I suspect Robbie may not have heard the glowing tributes.
Broadcasting are telling me his camera's off.
Right, okay.
I'm in a field somewhere.
Well, Robbie, if you want to come in at any other point with emotional farewell, we'll be ready for you. So the only other item just on chairperson's business, I just wanted to mention just something from last week's committee meeting. There were just a couple of comments made in committee last week that were directed at a member, the deputy chair in this incident, who wasn't in his chair to respond. So I just wanted to really just put on record from my perspective as chair that I would like it to be a ground rule of the committee that if we are going to direct remarks to any member, that we should ensure they are here to respond. I think just that as a basic sort of extension of courtesy to all members, I think we would all like to be afforded that courtesy. I don't really want to say any more than that. I think this is a committee where I think we do work collegiately when it's appropriate, but we do disagree robustly when we reach those issues, and that's absolutely appropriate. But for me, as chair, I would just like to put on record that my strong preference would be that a member be in situ to provide a response if a remark is directed to them. So I'm happy to leave it there unless any member wants to come in with anything further.
Well, could I just respond, given that the remarks were directed towards me last week? And I sympathise with David having to look across at me every week. I look in the mirror some mornings myself, especially after having had a few beers the night before. It's not a pretty sight, but leaving that to the side, on a serious note, I mean, the issue was around the Minister meeting the LCC, and rightly concerns and criticisms were raised around that meeting, given the fact that a number of other groups and individuals who are involved in the education sector or where it's cross-cutting with health have requested meetings going back as far as February. And haven't been given that facility. But the other issue is that whatever about the history of myself and Jerry Kelly, and Johnny was given chapter and verse in the chamber on Monday, the fact is we put ourselves in front of the electorate and we get a mandate from the electorate. The people who were meeting the Minister are unelected and probably in some cases unelectable. So there's a qualitative difference there, and that's all I have to say on the matter. So, thanks, Joe.
The other member wish to respond, David?
Sure. First of all, just to say my comments referenced Pat, but they weren't directed at Pat. But Pat has made a comment there around these people are not elected, but someone's electoral mandate does not mean that they shouldn't be heard in our society, that they shouldn't have a voice. There was a long time whenever Sinn Féin did not have the mandate that it had, and I don't think Republicans would have been arguing then that they shouldn't have had any sort of voice. So again, I make no apology for our party's engagement with Royalist representatives, and it's not about mandate. It's about what I was doing was making the comparison between how we have people who are elected to, yes, with a mandate, but elected to office and have a voice in these chambers that have a past of violent activity. They may justify that in a different way, but there will be plenty of people in my community, you will understand, who would say that Pat and people from his particular background are unelectable as well, or should be. That is not me directing an insult at Pat, but that is a matter of fact, and I think we all understand the society that we are in. So yeah, my comments weren't directed at Pat. They were actually about saying that if we're going to be expected from a unionist point of view to engage with people who are from a Republican background and have been involved in armed conflict, I would say terrorism, but that's a matter of each can choose their own words in that. Then we're also going to be willing to talk to people who are from the loyal side who have that kind of history. And that's all it was actually not. And I think if you listen back to my remarks, I didn't actually place any sort of insult towards Pat, or I simply said that Pat had a particular history. It's something that we were in a meeting last week, and Pat quite proudly, and I know that he's proud of his history because I've been in several meetings with him in the past where he has identified himself as a former IRA prisoner. He has said that he goes into schools, and when he goes into schools that he's not there to give a balanced view on things, but actually a Republican view. Whatever issues I have with that is something that Pat is on record as saying. That's all I made reference to in the committee last week, and all I'm saying is that if we're expected to sit with Republicans and listen to Republicans, then we're going to sit with Loyalists and listen to Loyalists too.
Well, just can I come back
briefly,
and don't want to get involved in the back and forth. And I have no difficulty talking to anyone. The issue here is that an unrepresentative group, an unelected group, had a meeting with the Minister to talk about education policy, about our young people. And they're not exactly, the best role models, I think, that we could be holding up, and many of them, and many of their actions, particularly those involved in drugs and extortion and so on, are responsible in many ways for underachievement in some of the working class loyalist areas. But, I mean, as I say, I don't want to go back and forth, but I think you have to make that distinction, David, that we are elected. We put ourselves in front of the electorate and we get a mandate. And that's what's important here. And also the case, and you didn't respond to this, Corlin na Gael Scully, or Gumalaiscal, Forrest na Gaeilge have been asking for a meeting since February, and they haven't been able to get it. And you probably heard Emma Cubitt on TV last week saying that she has been asking for a meeting for a long time. This is the independent autism reviewer, and I mean, SEN and autism and all of that is a major issue in the education system at the minute.
Sure, and I'm just going to come in there.
Yes, right. That's the point.
Can I make a suggestion? My comments at the outset of this meeting was really to ensure that I wanted to be clear in terms of setting a tone for our meetings, which was essentially that if a member is not here to respond, that I would prefer that they, unless it is in positive terms, that they not be referenced personally. I think that in terms of just extending that right of courtesy and the right of reply, that is the point that I'm making. I don't think we'd be well served going down the route of a debate around the LCC again. We have requested correspondence from the Minister in relation to that. I think when it comes back, I'm happy to have an open discussion in committee around the response that we receive, and we can air those issues at that stage. But I'm happy to draw a line at this stage, David. If you're going to come back, be very brief.
Not going to. Yes, I am.
We could very easily get.
I am going to be brief, but I just think it's important. Yeah. I think it's important, given Pat's remarks there. I'm not responding to Pat per se, but just to say that I made the point last week, and I will make it again, where he's talking about elements of criminality and involvement in drugs. Anyone who's involved in that activity, I have no defence to make for them. I hope the law deals with them as it should. I have no problems, and I will not equivocate around that. The LCC, in my understanding, is a body that is about helping those who want to transition within loyalism away from criminality to do that, and on that basis I'm happy to engage with them, but it's not certainly any endorsement of anybody who's involved in criminality.
Let's have that conversation when we have the Minister's correspondence back. So I'm content to move on at that stage. Just quickly check in again with Robbie. I'm just checking, Robbie, are you hearing us okay? Because I'm not sure if you are getting audio okay. I'm not sure.
The last time I done it, I logged on, whatever way it was, I couldn't turn my camera on. I could hear everything, I just couldn't turn the camera on. Turn the mic on.
Well, I'll leave it maybe for the team to see if there's any way we can establish contact with Robbie. It could be his last committee and a very quiet one for Robbie, which is not the norm. So item 3 is, and there's been no deliberate tampering with the technology, just to be very clear on that point. Declarations of interest is item 3 on the agenda. Do any members have specific interest to declare in relation to any items on the agenda today? No. Item 4 then is matters arising. Now we have a fairly big agenda today. Now 2 of our briefings. So there's Robbie joining us now. Robbie, are you able to hear us okay? You are. I think you perhaps missed warm tributes to you at your last committee meeting, so I'm happy just to bring you in here, as we are conscious you've served in this committee for quite some time, I'm happy to give you the floor if you have any remarks you want to make at this stage, but in case you didn't hear it, we just put on record our thanks for your service to this committee over the years. Nope. Nope. Again,
He doesn't want to say anything.
So the Gremlins have decided that Robbie's not going to be participating today. Look, if you get the text sorted, do feel free to come back in.
It's on.
Are you back in, Robbie? Over to you.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Would you mind going over the tribute again? I did hear it, but I do want to hear it once more.
It wasn't very long, Robbie.
Peter, I tell you what, I was a wee bit disappointed I didn't hear too many hears or something on the table, but
There was not a dry eye in the house, Robbie.
What I can say genuinely is that I am gutted in leaving the committee, because I've served on the committee now in the previous session and now in this, and it is absolutely, unequivocally, one of the most important committees without doubt, and I have a real heart for it. And I'm obviously going because I'm going to be chair of another committee, which is it's obviously a different role to fulfil, and I'm ambitious, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But I want to thank you, Chair, and Evelyn Clark, and all the support staff, and all of you other MLAs in regard to this. I think we're on a good page on most things, apart from the last topic, which just dropped off. I did cut out in the middle of a little bit of it, but listen, I know this committee will move on beyond that and work for all the young people across Northern Ireland, particularly those that need our help the most. And Colin Crawford, who will be my replacement, will, I hope, hit the ground running, guys. So thanks for working with you. I'll be on this right to the end, hopefully today, Chair. We'll input right up to the end if that's possible. And thanks for your chairpersonship.
Thank you, Robbie. Look, that's very much appreciated. And look, we're going to be a committee that's full of newer members, I think, bar one exception. So we'll definitely miss you, Robbie, and we genuinely wish you all the very best in your new role.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on then, matters arising. There is a fair bit here. I don't intend to spend too much time on it, as we want to make sure we have time for our briefings. But item 4.1, so I had asked a couple of items to be brought back, as I felt they were fairly substantial and we didn't really have maybe time to engage with them in detail last week as we were rushing through to get to our training session. But the first one, 4.1, is correspondence from the Department of Education, and it's a budget briefing paper, and we had agreed to have another look at it today. So my main concern with this, and why I was keen to bring this back, is that I think the budget briefing, it provides a lot of information about the scale of pressures. It makes some reference to savings that have been made, but I can't really identify any detail as to what actual spending decisions have been made, and that is my concern with this budget briefing. Essentially, I'm not clear from reading it how the Minister has allocated his budget. Where's the breakdown of what he has chosen to fund and what has he not chosen to fund? It's those decisions that ministers take that really are crucial when we're scrutinising budget. I think probably none of us are surprised at the pressures. I'm probably just as interested in what are the decisions that have been taken, particularly any discretionary spend that has been agreed to be made by the department. And I'm also concerned we can't really scrutinise October monitoring round bids coming through if we don't know the decisions that have preceded that. So my suggestions would be, unless anyone wants to come in with anything in more detail on this, I would suggest that we do write to the department to request urgent clarification, first of all, if they will be attending on the 16th. They're currently provisionally in the forward work plan. I'm satisfied if they're coming to speak to us that we'll have that opportunity. But if not, I think we should be seeking a request for a detailed breakdown, specifically in relation to how the budget has been spent so far in this financial year, what decisions have been taken. And I would probably add, if they are attending on the 16th, that we have that briefing in writing before they present to us, so we have that information. Can I just check with the members, are we content with that, or is there anything anyone wants to add or any alternative views on that matter? No, we agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, great. The next item there is item 4.2, and that is again correspondence from the department in relation to the early learning and childcare measures that were introduced in 24-25. Again, we brought that back really because it arrived just quite late as a tabled paper, to make sure that we did have the opportunity to make comment if required. I am content to note, but I am aware that the department did brief the all-party group.
Sorry about that.
No problem. brief the all-party group on early education and childcare, which I know a couple of members would have been at that briefing. I suppose I have a slight concern that the APG is getting a briefing before committee, but we'll leave that one where it is. But if there's anything maybe that needs to be fed back to the committee arising from the APG, very happy to hear that. But otherwise at this stage, content to note, and there is investment going in, and it's positive to see that. So I'll open the floor up.
Just a small comment. I was at the APG, and I suppose it's just about timing, so I don't think there's anything nefarious in it. But certainly the feedback from that APG was really positive about the scheme, and I think that should just be noted. I mean, I think probably the entire committee would agree. Childcare, early learning, support, early intervention, all that stuff is stuff that this committee will put a big tick beside. And I do believe this is the department doing something that is trying to start on that road. It's not a quick road, getting the support that's required, especially around childcare. But look, it's a start, and I think that should be noted.
No, absolutely. And look, it's a key priority for the committee to look at this area, early years and childcare. So no, it is welcome investment. Kathy?
Just really briefly, Chair, much the same as Peter mentioned, it's a really good start and it's positive. And at the APG, I know it was discussed, I couldn't make it, but there are a few issues and there are a few, I suppose, things that maybe haven't been addressed through this initial. But I do say that they're coming in to brief the committee, so it'll be good to get an opportunity then just around, because we'll see from the breakdown in the areas and stuff there around those parents who are on universal credit, who seem to have missed out, childminders, our community childcare as well. So there are a few gaps that need to be addressed, but it's certainly something we can raise whenever the department are in.
Yeah, I think we probably all welcome a good start, but all aware there's more to be done. So anyone else wants to come in on that at this stage?
Well, the comments already made, it was great to hear the progress, really impressive by the organisation who made it happen, and the collaboration they described between providers and parents to get it up and running, really, really worthwhile. Probably echo your views that the APG got a much better briefing than we're getting today. But as you say, they're coming in and we'll have that conversation when they do. But no, very positive start, really good.
Sorry, Chair, just one more point on that. Just I'm conscious that the APG did get that. I know the department are coming in, but have early years maybe an opportunity to have early years to come in and speak at the same time? Or
I mean, I think we can look at that. I'm not sure without the forward work plan in front of me at the moment what the scheduling is like for that in terms of what scope there is. But I think our hearing from early years would be welcome. So I think we can note that at this stage. And look, I hope, as Peter says, there was nothing nefarious in the timings on this. This is something really we're as a committee we're pretty united on in terms of a response. So that is positive to see. So the only other bit, and look again, I'm happy to take a steer from members in terms of how much time they think this is likely to take, but if we can deal with this item today, then I'm very happy to do so. And that is page 22 of your packs, and that's correspondence from the Committee for the Executive Office with a copy of the draft programme for government, and they are seeking committee responses to the draft PFG. So we did have a look at this at our meeting on the 18th, and it was agreed that we'd bring it back. So I mean, I'm happy to get a quick sense of members' views on this. I know there's probably going to be things that we won't agree on. I'm happy to put out there a couple of things that I think we will agree on, and then a couple of areas where I might see a gap, and then I'm happy to open that up. But if the conversation is becoming very detailed, we may need to bring this forward to another meeting. I think just following on from our last point, I would suggest that our response would want to welcome the early learning and childcare strategies inclusion in the draft PFG. I think that is something that we've been very clear about in all of our work in this committee so far. It's welcome to see the initial investment. But I think it is really now about what's delivery going to look like going forward. So we'd want to be very clear that remains a focus. But I would assume all of us would want to welcome that. And I would maybe just with an emphasis that yes, it's about childcare and it's about costs, but we also need to maintain that focus on early learning. If we're serious in the SEN space, which we're going to come to in a moment, about early intervention as being a key measure and a key intervention that we can do to try and address some of these issues arising, way upstream, then investment in early years seems to me probably the very best way that we can do that. So I would want to maybe just specifically reference that it's early years and early education, not just childcare, although it is all connected. And then the section in the PFG around better support for children and young people with SEN. I mean, I'm assuming that is not going to need to be rehearsed again here today. We have been clear from day one of this committee that is a priority, and I would assume we would want to note that continues to be the case for this committee, and we welcome it. Really, the test now is in delivery, and we look forward to the officials briefing us in the weeks ahead on their transformation plan, because it's that detail that is really going to be what makes the difference. From my perspective, in terms of gaps, I would want to suggest, and I think our two informal sessions that we have had probably draw this out pretty well. I would have liked to see something maybe in there around tackling educational underachievement and some of that wider focus around addressing the impacts of poverty. I mean, the connections with that and educational outcomes are just so clear. So that's an area where I would suggest we might want as a committee to highlight, we understand you can't have everything in, but maybe as a thread running through there, it might have been helpful to see that, and it's been something the committee's been very clear about. And I would just add into the mix maybe something around a transformation plan for all public services, but I think in education, we are sitting on the independent review with nothing really coming out of that so far. Education being a department under huge budgetary pressure, so really is there a piece of work there in this mandate that we need to be looking at in terms of actually delivering some transformation and how we deliver services? So those would be my thoughts. I'm happy to open it up to the floor here to other members to feel free to come in. I don't know, Deputy Chair, do you want to come in first?
I've nothing really to add to that, Nick, at the minute. I have to confess, I didn't realise we had discussed this last week to come back this week, so maybe I'll come back in next week sometime if we get a minute or two.
Well, I'm happy to sort of put those on record as my comments, so we don't need to revisit that again. I mean, are there any other members want to come in to add anything? If we're carrying it forward to another meeting for a further discussion, we don't have to give it any more time today if members would like more time.
Happy to defer. Happy to defer.
Okay. That's grand. So that moves us on to item 5, and that's draft minutes. So the draft minutes are at page 113 of your packs, and that is of our committee meeting of the 18th of September. So I would seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is that agreed? Agreed.
Mm-hmm. So could I just raise an issue in regard to the minutes?
Yes.
I know the committee noted the record of the informal meeting with the Bright Futures project, Peaches, and the day we met them, we asked them to bring forward, a dossier of evidence of the incidents that they told us about that day. I'm just wondering, have we heard anything else from them?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I'm not aware of any correspondence coming in.
No, that day they wrote to us, or the night before they wrote to us, but they haven't written to us since, sure they haven't, Mark. Okay.
That's fine. Okay, so that takes us on to item 6. So before I just bring the witnesses in, if I can just say the next two briefings, item 6 and 7, are in relation to the RSE inquiry. So we are hoping to take these as shorter briefings, really as information gathering exercises. So I mean, I would just ask members to try and keep questions to short, to the point, and we will be working to a 30 to 40 minute time scale for this brief. So just be aware of that whenever you're asking your questions. When I see once what time the witnesses finish their presentations, that'll give me a sense of how long we have for each inquiry. But if I could just ask for your cooperation and support with that, so we can get through the agenda. But I'm happy at this stage if we want to bring the witnesses through. So the first briefing today is a briefing from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. There is a briefing note at page 119, and then a briefing paper from the Commissioner's office at page 120. So you may want to refer to that, but I'll just let the witnesses come in and get sat down and settled. Hi, Chris.
Some members will have met the Commissioner yesterday at the stakeholder event, but also the Chair met in a pre-meeting, and the Commissioner addressed this document with them, so that will be circulated to everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome. Chris, I feel like I've seen a lot of you the last few days, but you're all very welcome. So I'll just quickly introduce the panel, and then we can move into the evidence session. So joining us today we have Chris Quinn, the Northern Ireland's Children's Commissioner. We have Dr. Arlene Robinson, who is the Policy and Research Officer at the Commissioner's Office. We have Madison Blair joining us, who is a member of the Commissioner's Office Youth Panel. So you're very, very welcome, and I look forward to hearing from you, Madison. We have Rachel Woods, Senior Policy and Research Officer from NICCY, and Joanne McGurk, Head of Legal and Investigations at the Commissioner's Office. So you're all very welcome. I would just say at this stage, it's a big panel, and our time is fairly short. So if I could ask, where possible, if there is one person who's identified as appropriate to answer a particular question, that we try and stick to that, so that we can get through all of the questions from members. But I appreciate there may be areas of crossover, and we can't be rigid on that. But if I could just ask you to bear in mind, we are scheduling in sort of 30 to 40 minutes for this briefing session. So I'll be keeping members right, but I think in this instance I'll also may have to keep yourselves right at times if I need to ask you to bring the answer to a conclusion, just as we have a big agenda today. But really at this stage I am very happy to hand over to yourselves for any initial remarks or initial presentation. We have your briefing paper, but if I could say up to 10 minutes for initial comments, and then we'll move into question and answer from there. And members, just indicate at any time if you would like to be included for a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just skip past introductions, as we've already done that. And I'm going to pass to Madison straight away, actually, because Madison's going to set the scene from a NICCY perspective, and then I'll make a statement as well. But you have our briefing paper, and just like you, I want to make as much time for colleagues to feed in as possible. So Madison, over to you.
Thank you so much for having us here today, because RSE is vital in preparing children and young people for life, which is why it is necessary that they all receive this education, regardless of who they are or what school they go to. Children and young people need to be taught about healthy relationships of all kinds. They need to be educated on what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, and we need to ensure that they are able to determine this for themselves, especially children who are in more vulnerable circumstances. To ensure that all young people are able to access the same information, parents should not be able to opt their children out of RSE. This would help protect children and young people by equipping them with the knowledge and tools to seek help when necessary. During RSE, young people should be taught about their rights in the UNCRC in relation to the topics being discussed. For example, Article 34, which is the right to be protected from sexual abuse. This would help educate young people on their rights, whilst demonstrating examples of how these rights should be respected and what to do if they are not. Consent is a very important aspect of RSE, and currently the curriculum doesn't highlight it nearly enough. It is essential that children are taught about privacy and how to set clear boundaries. No means no, even for something as seemingly harmless as hugs. If a child is uncomfortable, it does not matter how small this contact seems. Children need to know that they do not need to justify their refusal. Students with special educational needs are more vulnerable and are unfortunately at more risk. And therefore it is essential that not only do they receive ample and sufficient RSE, but their peers do as well, so that they are able to have these conversations and are able to know what to do if issues arise. Additionally, the curriculum should include all relevant scientific terms, for example, of body parts, because it is vital in ensuring that young people are confident in their own bodies and in removing any stigma, especially surrounding women's health. By expanding children and young people's vocabulary, you're promoting more open discussions between them and thus helping to improve their communication skills in all relationships that they are and will be a part of. When I was fortunate enough to receive RSE in primary school, we were separated by gender. This had the opposite effect. This made us feel scared to talk about our own bodies, especially the girls who still to this day will use a myriad of euphemisms simply because they are too embarrassed to discuss their period freely. Introducing RSE from an early age will promote healthy discussions about bodily autonomy and will help foster healthy relationships between young people. RSE should also take into account the impact of social media in regards to spreading misinformation, It should combat this by ensuring all young people are taught scientifically accurate information. It is quite easy to fall into traps online, and this is clear through the influence of individuals such as Andrew Tate, who grew a large fan base of young boys by spreading false, misogynistic information and promoting toxic masculinity. Young people should be taught how to identify misinformation to try to prevent the rise of similar content creators. This would also be in line with the new Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. On social media platforms, especially TikTok, it is often hard to avoid sexual content and/or inaccurate information regarding sexual relationships and health. I, as a young person, have fallen victim to the algorithm promoting this kind of content on more than one occasion, despite my best efforts to block any harmful content. This is why it is important that sections of the RSE curriculum regarding social media are frequently updated to keep up with constantly changing terminology used online. Many videos on TikTok are captioned using cryptic phrases, such as, "My shampoo and conditioner ran out on the same day," on a video that is actually about suicide. And so it is incredibly important that young people are taught about how to identify possible hidden meanings within social media posts to prevent them from accidentally sharing or promoting harmful and/or inappropriate content that contains information contradictory to that within the RSE curriculum. Young people need to access information that will benefit them, and so it is essential that there are no barriers to them receiving accurate and comprehensive RSE.
Thank you, Madison. Really well done. I'm going to have trouble following that. But yeah, from our perspective as an organisation, I think I would just like to begin by saying, in preparation for this meeting, when we discussed as a team our experiences of RSE, they were all very, very different. And I would make an assumption that the people in this room probably had similar, different diversity of experience of RSE. This issue isn't the new one. I've been involved in working with children and young people for probably about 30 years. And I can remember campaigns by the UK Youth Parliament, the Secondary School Students' Union, the Northern Ireland Youth Forum and others, who all called for a curriculum for life, and specifically for RSE to be taught as part of the curriculum. In terms of my opening remarks, given that I was here around about 6 months ago and talked about our statutory role and remit, I'll not go back over that again. And I'm very aware that the committee is very well informed in the background and policy context of RSE, including the CEDAW inquiry and legislative change, so I'll not go over that again. I will say that I've watched with interest all of the committee sessions on this issue, and I watched listened with particular interest what the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission said, and I would just like to put on record that I fully endorse the views and recommendations with regards to their input here. We, NICCY, have consistently highlighted the need for the provision of comprehensive, factual and age-appropriate and scientifically accurate relationship and sexuality education in schools. Comprehensive RSE is relevant to a wide range of children's rights, some of which Madison has already touched on. And there are several articles within the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that this speaks to. So, for example, the right to education, the best interests of the child, the right to health, the right to protection from violence and abuse, the right to survival and development, right to identity, non-discrimination and freedom of expression, which is Article 13. We welcome the RSE NI amendment introducing mandatory requirement for the inclusion of age-appropriate, comprehensive and scientifically accurate education on sexual and reproductive health and rights, covering prevention of early pregnancy, and access to abortion for adolescents in the Northern Ireland curriculum. Effective RSE will be compliant with the United Convention's Committee Statement on the Rights of the Child, where in their concluding observations in June 2023, they advised that state parties should integrate comprehensive, age-appropriate and evidence-based education on sexual and reproductive health into mandatory school curricula at all levels and into teacher training, and ensure that this includes education on sexual diversity, sexual and reproductive rights, responsible sexual behaviour and violence prevention without the possibility of faith-based schools or parents opting out. The evidence is clear that young people want a comprehensive programme of RSE as part of the curriculum. The ETI review of the preventative curriculum reported that young people would like to know more about issues including identity, sexual orientation, and those with regards to LGBTQI. They also talked about wanting the greater involvement of pupils on RSE, and they asked for more in-depth discussions and delivery by teachers who are confident, knowledgeable, and comfortable with the topics. It's imperative that we listen to young people, and Madison has articulated beautifully the views of one young person on this issue, and that they are meaningfully involved in the process relating to RSE. The value of consulting with young people as experts in their own lives and as key stakeholders in the development and implementation of RSE is well documented. RSE is likely to be most effective when the current beliefs and practices of children and young people are taken into consideration. The ETI evaluation supports this, finding that in more effective practice, pupils' views were used to inform and develop the preventative curriculum. Sufficient investment in teacher professional training to ensure that they are supported and equipped to deliver high quality and comprehensive RSE must be a priority. There are a wide range of issues that are of relevance to today's discussion, including RSE policy, the guidance, the involvement of parents, monitoring, responsibilities of teachers and governors, and of course the opt-out provision. I'm mindful of time. I think that's us within the 10 minutes, so I'm going to pause now to invite colleagues to respond to questions of the committee.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks. So I'll try and practice what I preach here and not go too far over time. I wanted to start probably with a question just around the role of young people in terms of developing good RSE material and curriculum, and possibly to Madison, but for anyone else who wants to come in, I mean, what do you think could be done to better engage young people in the development of the curriculum, of resources, to ensure that it is helpful, reflects the world that you actually live in, and meets your needs?
Well, there's plenty of youth organisations already in place. There's Northern Ireland Youth Forum, the Secondary Students' Union, and of course NICCY. So I think engaging with as many of those young people from as many different backgrounds as physically possible and different areas, you know, outside Belfast, rural areas, that's going to ensure that you have a fully developed curriculum and ensuring that all the resources are accurate and representative of young people in Northern Ireland.
Do you feel as a young person you've been engaged with at school level, say, in terms of your school's RSE policy?
I wouldn't say so, no. There's very little RSE in place in most schools and very little discussion with young people about what should be contained within RSE. I know that in our school's case, we had Love for Life come in and deliver RSE, so there was very little discussion. It was you sat in a room and you were told a presentation. So maybe if it was more involvement of young people within the actual education itself.
Yeah, I wonder, pardon me, but Arlene, I don't know if you want to add to that in terms of inclusion and how important, because I'm just looking at what the ETI report said, and it specifically talked about the practice of RSE is much more effective when pupils' views are used to inform and develop the preventative curriculum. But for me, that overlaps into the space of inclusion and what young people are telling us broadly around that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of involving young people, as Madison has kind of touched upon, I would say it's at every stage of the process. So it's informing the resources, even the delivery of RSE in school, the evaluation of RSE. It's not just we've consulted with young people, box ticked kind of thing. It should be an ongoing process. Chris mentioned inclusion there. I mean, you probably will be aware, it was touched upon by the Gillen review, the Human Rights Commission's review, the ETI's review. RSE in schools just isn't inclusive. You know, if we're talking about for example, pupils with special educational needs and disability, LGBTQ+, pupils, I don't think enough focus has been on how do we respond effectively to those findings. You know, and it covers a different strands. It's about making resources inclusive themselves. Young people need to be able to see themselves in those resources. A lot of the resources are heteronormative. You know, there's no reference to same-sex relationships, just for an example. You know, it's about the case studies that are used in schools, the imagery that are used in resources, the terminology, the language, all of these things has to be reflective of this whole school community and population. It's not enough for a school just to say we have an inclusive ethos and environment, we respect these different views. It's actually that pupils can see themselves within the resources, that the teaching is tailored towards their needs, their specific needs. Pupils with special educational needs and disability. The ETI, I think, focused on pupils with severe learning disabilities, and that special schools felt like more bespoke resources and training was needed. But I would add also around pupils in mainstream schools. You know, pupils with special educational needs and disability, there's a diverse range of needs there. You may have pupils in the autistic spectrum that intellectually there's no specific barriers there, but socially and emotionally they may not relate to the material in the same way that other students do. It might be that it needs to be taught differently, and yeah, so I think it's just an area that, you know, it does warrant more attention in terms of how RSC is kind of being, the curriculum is being developed, SIA are developing the resources, the language that's used, but also that teachers are trained so that they can respond to pupils' needs effectively.
That's very helpful. I'll ask one other question and then I'll open up to other members. One of the things in your briefing paper that you referenced was a concern around the level of engagement that's built into those opt-out provisions that came through with the new regulations. What do you think could be done to rectify that, to ensure that the voice of young people is heard whenever an opt-out request is made?
You want to take this one, Chris?
I'd pass back to you. I suppose generally speaking I would be concerned that we're talking about young people here who are aged between 11 and 15, 16, you know, so approaching the age of consent. So the assumption is that young people may be engaged in relationships and may be sexually active, and we have issues with regards to the opt-out, and within the guidance I have particular concern about the guidance that we saw wouldn't be very, I would have reservations over to what degree the young person actually has a say in that opt-out. Arlene, I'm going to pass back to you though, because you've spoke about this issue.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much what Chris said. We felt like the guidance just wasn't strong enough. There was very little provision for young people to give their views. There was a lot of flexibility and discretion given to schools in terms of consulting with young people. I felt like it was very disappointing that the pro forma didn't even have a space for the young person to give their signature and to say that they had been consulted and to give their views. You know, a 15-year-old can speak for themselves. I appreciate there are sensitivities around balancing parents, you know, but when we're talking about young people that maybe are in intimate relationships, they are going to have a view about what type of RSE education they need. I think we have been looking at Article 5 of the Convention, and the committee, they published a statement on this which you might find quite useful. So it goes into the kind of responsibilities and rights of parents to provide appropriate guidance to young people, the young person's evolving capacities, which means that they should be given increasing responsibility to make decisions for themselves. I think it could actually be quite useful to this whole debate. It also goes into the responsibilities of states to build the capacity of parents, because I think in this kind of context there's a lot of misconceptions out there because of the misinformation campaigns. So it's as much about kind of raising awareness with parents and young people about what this is all about. You know, for us, safeguarding and protecting young people and children is at the heart of this, and, you know, promoting young people's well-being.
I'm going to open up to members. I'll start with Deputy Chair, and we're looking probably about 3 minutes per inquiry, so really the quicker we get to question and keeping answers focused, that would be most helpful. So over to yourself, Pat.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering how extensive was the engagement that you've had with the Department and the Minister?
I would have to say that it's been limited to none. We had a specific meeting with departmental officials a number of months ago, and we discussed the issue, particularly around the area that Arlene has just covered, and the lack of consultation that young people, the lack of opportunity for young people to engage in that consultation. I haven't engaged with the Minister directly about it. However, I have written to the Permanent Secretary and flagged with his officials my concerns around the process. Would colleagues like to add to that?
I think that pretty much. We have regular periodic meetings with the Department of Education, so it has been on ongoing agendas. And just apart from that, what Chris has said, we've raised our concerns, haven't we?
Yeah.
You haven't had a meeting with the Minister on this issue, no?
No.
Okay. All right, just moving on then. In terms of your investigation and RSE, does it, in terms of the type of school or the ethos of the school, does that impact on the level or the quality of the RSE that's delivered in the school?
I think this is one of the areas that we'd appreciate that the committee looks further at. We would have concerns about, my own opinion would be that we need more than guidance. I do feel we need a policy. I think there's probably a role for ETI in looking at quality assuring how RSE is taught within the curriculum. I think we also need to look at the role of governors in this and their awareness of the guidance and the impact of school ethos. We've heard anecdotal accounts of school leaders directing teachers not to teach certain elements. Now, I couldn't give you, hard evidence on that, but I think it's back to the point about how we monitor and quality assure the teaching of RSE in schools. The role of...
Sorry, Chris, how can that be done, in your opinion?
I think, slightly controversially, I think perhaps at times governors have too much autonomy. And I know there's probably governors in this room, and I was a governor myself. I think at times we need more. I do think a policy in this instance is needed. And I do think that we're talking about teaching children about healthy relationships. We're talking about children who could be vulnerable, who could be experiencing adverse childhood experiences, who could be vulnerable to coercion and exploitation. We all have a duty to safeguard those children and work in their best interests. And I think in doing that, it's essential that young people are taught about healthy relationships, about boundaries, about coercive control, and about RSE in general. I would argue for a policy, and I would argue that perhaps we need to look further at our model of education and the autonomy at times that governors have.
Anna, you had indicated next.
Oh, thank you. I suppose coming back to the youth perspective of it, and Madison, it was brilliant what you delivered to us. I'm lucky that I get to talk to many young people within my own community, within our youth clubs, but they all say the same thing, whether it's in a youth club or the more politically engaged young people like yourself, or the hard to reach kids, that they are not getting their information where they should be getting their information. and there's, I suppose, an acceptance themselves now that a lot of the information they're getting is misinformation from TikTok and all that. While that's good to some point, it's how do we make it better for them, and why are we still having that disparity throughout our schools? Now, depending on what child you talk to, it could be just a matter of a mile down the road what school to go to, who gets a better RSE education. So it's, I suppose, touching on what Pat had said as well, what are those big obstacles and what can be done better? That's more of a wrap round from youth clubs to our schools to make sure that they're well equipped.
I think part of the issue for me is who is monitoring this and what are they monitoring? Pat mentioned quality, and that for me is a big part of it. You know, schools obviously have lots of different competing priorities, and I have heard when out and about, you know, they just don't want to dedicate the time to this, or they don't feel like they have the skills. I heard a presentation from NICCY recently where they were talking about going into schools and they're coming in with a workshop that they have a lot of experience in delivering around consent and other issues, and it works with a small group of students or a class, but schools are saying, we don't have the time for this, we just want you to kind of stand at the front of the assembly and deliver this. So it's that quality element, and you know, when we, I suppose, is how are we going to monitor this? I would like to find out more about who will, when that will happen, what will be involved in the monitoring process, because it could easily be a tick box kind of exercise. It's that quality issue, how much time students, and the research tells us, students want this to be consistent, for messages to be constantly reinforced, to be revisited. They don't just want a kind of like, right, we've done that lesson on consent, let's move on kind of thing.
Yeah, could I just add, I mean, learning for life and work is taught in most schools, I would say, up until a certain level, if not all. Madison, is it?
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so.
All schools probably up until about fourth year or whatever. I would argue that RSE needs to be part of the learning for life and work curriculum. It needs to be almost a standardised part of our curriculum. I think there's a role for SIA in this, and there's that issue of how we support our teaching staff and equip them with the skills and the confidence to engage in these kinds of conversations. What I would say is that there are experts particularly in the community voluntary sector, that can support that kind of approach. I would argue for a hybrid approach where voluntary sector organisations maybe come in and give a block of bespoke training and guide. You know, the teacher can be part of that process, but fundamentally young people have said that this should be standalone, and it should be a consistent, and as Arlene says, it should be quality assured.
Yeah, would that be your experience from all sectors of our young people, when I say like the hard to reach kids who aren't engaged in like youth clubs, from our youth clubs, and then young people you talk to who are more politically astute? Because it'd be very easy for a politician, say, to turn around and go, I know that's coming from someone who's well tuned in. That's RSE is not a big deal out there to other young ones. My experience will be that's a universal message I get. Would that be your experience?
Yeah, that's briefly on this, Chris.
Yeah, very much so, but I would just like to go back to the point about children who are vulnerable. Children, often some of the most vulnerable children that we engage with, do not know that they're being exploited or coerced. Yeah. And I think that's the type of child, we need to reach all children with this. But yes, to answer your question, the majority of children and young people I speak to, that message is very clear. But I think there's an onus on us to reach in, particularly those young people who are extremely vulnerable.
Is that time?
No, unfortunately not, Donna. We're packed agenda today, unfortunately. Peter, you are next.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you for attending this afternoon, folks. You referenced the UN committee's concluding observations, and I'm not going to read it all out because I realise I have 3 minutes, but it starts integrate, comprehensive, age appropriate. It ends with, without the possibility of faith-based schools or parents to opt out of such an education. Can you tell me how that reads alongside Article 2 of the Protocol and ECHR, that the state shall respect the rights of parents to ensure such training and such teaching and education in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions?
Yeah,
Just briefly, if you can.
Yeah, that's fine. So you'll be aware probably in asking the question, it's an evolving area certainly of jurisprudence. And within human rights law, there is that margin of appreciation in terms of how it is applied. And I know you've heard evidence on that before. So when you're looking at the balancing of those rights, there is that margin of appreciation that is applied. And certainly the European courts, have a slightly different position to the UN Committee in terms of concluding observations. But when we look at the Wales decision, so in Wales they don't have an opt-out, and that went to the High Court, and of course that was deemed compatible with the European Convention, our law here. So it is a balancing act, but the important sort of, I suppose, aspect of that is that the fundamental right to education is not undermined in terms of balancing parental rights and children's rights.
The thing that is undermined is their chance to withdraw children from schools if it's not in if they don't agree with it on their religious or philosophical grounds, i.e. freedom of religion, freedom of conscience.
But I suppose we're talking about age-appropriate, comprehensive, scientifically accurate information provided in that sphere, and looking at children's health, well-being and safeguarding. So teaching those the factual information is what we are, advocating for here.
And I think we find common ground around things like consent and social media and porn and a whole range of things that Madison touched on. I suspect there will be a lot of parents probably wouldn't agree with with some of the elements, for example, around what you've called reproductive rights. But let me leave that for a second. I've got 3 minutes, so I'm going to get my second question in here. In terms of that statement that you referenced, the UN Committee Community Observations, I have read it. It references faith once in that 23-page document, right? And it doesn't at all advocate for or suggest that any children from a faith-based background or religious background should have any particular rights. I was surprised at that. So I was wondering, in terms of NICCY, have you advocated for just any policy on, released any press statements on advocating for children of a religious or faith-based background, say in the last year?
I have to disagree with you. I don't think the UN Convention does reference a young person's rights and their faith the way you've interpreted it. In fact, I think it's Article 13 talks very definitely about the child's right to having a religious identity. I would encourage, and again, look, I've done my own research in this and I have engaged with groups from the faith-based sector. I would encourage that the committee do that for themselves. I'm not going to sit here and talk for them. But I do think that you might, I would encourage the committee to reach into those groups. The
committee will do that, I'm no doubt. Chris, my question was around NICCY and whether NICCY has advocated for any children of a faith-based or religious background in the last year, because obviously there's a lot of stuff here, this is an RSC inquiry. Yeah, I'm very interested.
Of course we have, we represent young people of all walks, and we engage with hundreds, if not thousands of young people day in, day out. So of course we have advocated for people with faith-based backgrounds.
So you've issued 47 statements in the last 9 months. Do you want to point me to the one that you said you had advocated for? I mean, could you point me to a statement where you have done that, even in the last...
Could you point me to one that doesn't, that you would feel that would be detrimental or negative towards people with a faith-based background? I don't think any of my statements have been anti-faith-based.
I haven't said they have, and you're the witness, so I can't answer, answer your question. But I was just wondering, having looked at this,
running short on time. If you
I appreciate that, Nick. No, look, I'm quite happy to conclude there, but I did have a look, and certainly I'm very passionate that NICCY represents everybody, all children. Certainly, the UN concluding observations didn't have anything in that would support children of faith, and there's lots of them in Northern Ireland. My question was, had NICCY released any policy documents, press statements or anything in the last 9 months or even year or even the last 5 years that specifically advocated for children from a faith background?
I think I've answered the question as much as I can. If you have an issue with any of the statements that I have issued, if you think it is anti-faith based, I would encourage you to write to me, and I would put on the record that your interpretation of the UN Convention is not, as you put it, and it does protect the rights and best interests of all children, including those of faith.
At no point did I suggest that.
I'm going to draw a line on
Yeah.
this one now.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Peter. Michelle, you were next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your time. I appreciate the evidence that you're given. I'm probably a little uncomfortable with the questions that seem to attack the organisation, but I'm grateful for your evidence here, and I think it's been very helpful. A couple of people have touched on opt-out now, and I don't want to cover the same ground again. What I would like to know is, and I don't want to get into discussion around content, but there is the Education Authority does have an RSE progression framework. And I'm just wondering, it's not mandatory at the minute, but if we're looking at bringing in something that is mandatory potentially as an outworking of this, do you think it provides a good basis for what might be the content or a good starting point?
Rachel, I can see you nodding.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that one?
I can do, and Peter, I'd be happy to issue you some further correspondence in relation to your last question, because we have point to you to some things on our website, should that be helpful for you, particularly around good relations and Brexit, where we did a very in-depth analysis with our youth panel who represent every community in Northern Ireland, and we make great efforts to ensure that they do, but we'll get back to you in writing on that one. Regarding the framework, yes, so it is in existence there. The minimum content order is minimum content, and there is a progression there which has to recognise children's evolving capacities. So the issue seems to be over the new regulations, and we have been involved with feeding back with the new regulations and the content that comes with that, and we did make some recommendations, and we look forward to the updated CA website with I believe it is in the autumn. Arlene, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think so, yeah.
We are due to see some updated content on that. So it is there, the framework is there, so it doesn't, in terms of sort of that barrier, it doesn't seem to be existing from that end. But we do need to really significantly increase the levels of student participation in this, and we need to make sure that what is being taught, and what needs to be taught is being taught, but also having that flexibility. Madison talking about the online harms, many of you will have been engaged with the online harms bill and the act that now is, and those kind of framework documents around it. But in terms of what children and young people are being exposed to, this is constantly changing, and we cannot keep up with it. In terms of yourselves as policymakers and legislators, it's very, very difficult for legislation to keep up with the changes in technology, but we really have to be mindful of where children are getting their education from. We've had reports recently, and you may all have seen it, children as young as 8 years old accessing extreme pornography online. That is where children and young people are learning their relationship and sexuality education, because they're not getting it where they should be, or it's not appropriate. So how you can't have that both ways. You can't have it not being taught properly, but it's okay, they'll access it second hand or somewhere else. It needs to be standardised, and it needs to be accessible in an open and safe environment, taught by people that young people trust, that they're able to have an engaged in conversation with. And at no stage would we ever be saying that those kind of ethical and philosophical conversations don't come hand in hand. They absolutely do. But to have a minimum age-appropriate, mandatory and scientifically accurate conversation shouldn't negate anybody receiving that education because of an alternative viewpoint, which they're absolutely entitled to. Of course it's a right to. But it's having that framework reflect all of those needs. Very difficult to do well across the board, but that does exist. There are resources that are being developed, and we certainly welcomed being part of that, and we do look forward to those being published, hopefully whenever the autumn is.
Just one follow-up, and it's a really basic question, but I think I'd like to hear the answer from this perspective of your particular organisation. What do you think is the fundamental purpose, the outcome you'd want from having this RSE curriculum that is scientifically accurate, factual, etc., we've heard that. What do you think the ultimate outcome is?
One member could take that question and answer briefly.
Yeah, for me, it's what young people have called for as long as I've worked in this sector. It's a curriculum for life.
Can I just add to that?
That's a nice quick answer there.
I would go back to the CEDAW inquiry, where this all originated, and their findings, where they looked at girls and young women and the barriers they were facing in accessing information with regard to abortion contraception and so forth. So I think that's fundamental to this. And if this isn't implemented in schools, there's going to be gendered impacts. We need disaggregated data.
David, you'd indicate it next.
Thanks very much, Chair. One of the things actually I was going to ask about, I think Rachel actually has addressed it, because I was thankful to hear, if you'll forgive the preamble, Chair.
Wasn't listening last.
Yes. Was around that ethical context, because sometimes I feel that some who have come to present or talk about these issues at times have want these things taught in isolation, and I quite strongly I think that if even for those who don't want to opt out, who are going to take part in such discussions, it seems to me mad that you could have discussions around some of these issues, that there are divides and cleavages across the world that divide people, yet not discuss some of the social discussions around them, whatever the viewpoint. So I just wanted to, that having been addressed, Arlene, you had mentioned sort of 15-year-olds can speak for themselves, and I think everybody accepts that as young people get older, there is greater capacity to make some decisions. But I'm not trying to be facetious here, but at what age do you think that a parent should stop having that parental right and to parent their children, to decide what is right morally and ethically and right for their education? In that sense?
I think that's a valid question, because it's one I've kind of grappled with myself. I mean, I think there's the developmentally, it's not just about being age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and who decides that, how is that assessed. But I think as a parent you can also take parents, teachers, the different stakeholders that surround and kind of come into contact with young people every day. You have a good kind of understanding of their levels of maturity, of their capacity to make decisions for themselves. It's kind of like an organic process, you know, it can't be some kind of arbitrary cut-off. Okay.
But mandatory education in this subject doesn't work like that either. It's about saying that, okay, they've reached a stage, now they're entitled to, now they must have this education. They must be taught these issues, and there are some of those issues around safeguarding and so on. And it's a frustration of mine. I think sometimes we all sit around and we know what sides of the debate we're on largely, but we talk past each other around issues on things like consent and safeguarding, and there might be elements we're largely agreed on. Mm-hmm. But having all of the elements of RSC as mandatory takes that approach. It says to children of a certain age that they're all the same. They should all have the same. Input. It doesn't, and takes away from the parent then from deciding that actually my child I don't think is ready for that at this stage, and that's why I'm interested in exploring what age a parent should stop having that say over a child.
It's hard to put a figure on it, to be honest, but I think, you know, I would just take a common sense approach, but I think at the very least young people need to have a say. You know, the way the guidance is drafted at the moment, parents speak for the young person. There's very little room there to engage with the young person and to allow them to have a view, and you know that's just not acceptable. I think, you know, we need to. Sorry, do you want to come in here, Chris?
Oh, you finish. I've got a point though when you're finished.
Yeah, I'll let Chris.
Yeah, no. I think the key thing here is age appropriate. You know, that is consistent in all of the text here. And again, going back to Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which talks about the voice of the child, it's very clear about the age and maturity of the child and the best interests principle. So I think what's key in this discussion is the age appropriate element. And I would just add that I would hope that in any school context there is space for religious or, you know, moral and ethical debate, you know, outside of this part of the curriculum. I think the answer of age, Arlene has said, we can't put an age on a child.
I think I just want to, if I've still time, I just want to get another question in. So I think we've got. Yes, thanks, Chair. You had said about a couple of comments was quite simple things that the majority of people you speak to, and you don't want to speak for the people that were in those faith groups. And I am not trying to misrepresent you. I understand what you're saying around that. And Rachel had said about the youth forum, and it's an issue. Danny touched on it with his question, I think, around representation, how we make sure that those people of faith and others are accurately represented whenever we have someone who's presented very well, by the way, very articulate, but who come and spoke to committee. How we make sure that young people who are involved in organisations like your own are representing or come from an organisation that's representative of all young people. Now, you're not going to be able to put forward everybody's viewpoint.
That the question's clear. Time is short, so
how do you do that actively? You said
panel member
how do you actively ensure that?
I heard this raised at a previous committee meeting about the youth assembly, and I didn't feel very comfortable with it. I think sometimes there's assumptions made about young people. Nobody in this committee knows Madison's background or any of the,
or was trying to
presume her background. Point being, there's almost an assumption at times that young people that are involved in groups or advocacy are from a certain background. I think that's wrong. I think that's a disservice to the groups that work with them. From my perspective, having worked in youth participation for years, and I know of organisations that do their best to reach out, I think the voices of all children are really important in this. And again, I would welcome, in my work, in all of our work, we welcome all views.
And I think there's some areas that are very hard to reach. It's not a
giving you way over time on this one, unfortunately. I'll have to move on to bring Robbie in. So Robbie, and again we are clock very much ticking here. So if I can ask for straight to question and answer.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for this. Very quickly, I think I'm just going to go in and around the opt-out, if you don't mind too. I asked a question and it's slightly different to the Human Rights Commission in regard to if they thought young people had the capacity and the maturity to make a decision to opt out. So obviously the focus has been in and around adults. What would the Children's Commissioner's Office position be on in Key Stage 3, for instance, a 14 to 16-year-old, and perhaps if they were to invoke Article 14 in regards to that as their premise for wanting the opt-out, and if you can give me your position on that, and then because I don't think there's a hierarchy of UN articles, and we've been encouraging our young people to speak truth to power for many years now, but there is no hierarchy of youth. So could you give me your opinion on young people opting out, particularly around the minimum content piece, or the minimum content piece, because I think that's the bit that we're all talking around. Because let's be honest, guys, we need to get this RSE right to protect our young people, particularly those that are vulnerable and young women.
Yeah, my question, Robbie, around that would be the process. So how do you engage the young person in the process? Let's give them a space and support to discuss their particular concerns around elements of the curriculum. But I think for me, we're not come back. This isn't a debate about. I think this debate often gets caught up in the moral and ethical considerations.
But it has. But Chris, to be fair, Chris, I spoke about this with the Human Rights Commission. Perhaps for some people and some young people, the moral and the ethical might be the primary thing in their life at that time. Yeah. And that might be okay for them. That's and I'm not saying, by the way, it has to be in there. I'm not against it at all. I'm just thinking, I take myself back to when I was 14 or 15. There's a bit that I would probably have chosen not to sit in, and I'm not encouraging anybody not to. But Article 14 says you're entitled to your religious and philosophical ideas, and as long as you don't hurt anyone else, as long as it doesn't impact on anyone else. So, from your perspective, does NICCY, does the Children's Commissioners always think then that it absolutely must be mandatory, and young people with a capacity can't opt out?
Okay, so the first thing I would say, this is a discussion about RSE, not RE. I think those two things.
I'm asking you. I'm asking you a question about RSE, the minimum content piece, Chris, which is what this is all about. I get that.
I'm trying to answer you, Robbie, with respect. My view would be getting that process right. So, what is the process? If a child wants to opt out, what is the process? The process that is there at the minute is not appropriate. This is based on the parent. This is a parental opt-out.
I get that, but I haven't asked you about Chris. I've said I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you about, do you think there should be scope for a young person to opt out? I'm not asking about I'm asking you about. Honestly, I don't think it's a choice of me.
I think with regards to scientifically accurate.
Well, no. Okay. You're not going to answer, Chris. That's fine. Thank you.
Yes. So have it. Kathy has indicated, and then we're going to be out of time, so I'll bring Kathy in.
Mine's just really, really brief, and it's just, I have to be honest, I'm completely perplexed at some of the previous members' line of questioning. You said it there, Chris, we're here to talk about RSE, and from my experience, NICCY reps, even in my own area, are champions of all children, from no matter what their background, whether they have particular faith or none. So I just want to ask one really simple question, and it's going against last week because it's probably a closed question, is do you make any difference in how or if you will represent a child that maybe has a particular faith or none?
I will represent every child. It's my ambition. There's 500,000 children that live in Northern Ireland. I'm doing my damnedest to meet every single one of them. Despite my team saying, Chris, will you stay in the office for a while? I will talk with anyone, work with anyone, and represent the views of anyone. And I believe that we're proactive in doing that. And we seek to engage. We target, we listen. And yes, to answer your question, I'm here to serve every child in Northern Ireland.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to finish, probably, I think, one of the things that might be helpful just to reflect on in terms of opt-outs, and I think and I don't want to speak for NICCY, because there's been a lot of discussion back and forward. From my perspective, I think it's important that we note parents are quite right to raise concerns and register an interest in their child's education. So I don't think that anyone on this committee is going to argue with that, but from my perspective, I would want to put on record that my concerns around the opt-out is its blanket nature. I think it's the lack of really robust provision to hear what the young person or child is saying, that it doesn't sit well with me that a parent can sign a letter to say my child does not object. I think there's no robust process in there, and that's where my concern would rest with it. But I think we probably need to be cautious about setting up children against parents in this scenario, because I think, vast majority of parents have the best interests of their child at heart, and the vast majority of educators have the interests of children at heart. And I think there's a space where we can have these conversations in a non-threatening manner, where everyone's views are taken into account. But I think, for me, the big concern, I don't want to prejudge outcomes of this inquiry, but my big concern is the current guidance feels to me to provide no space for the child's voice to be heard. That's my concern, and I think schools should be supported to create policies which ensure, yes, parents have a space to have their voice heard, but so should the young person. And that would be my view at this stage, but we've a lot more evidence to hear. I'm happy to leave it at that stage. Thank you all for your time, and I know it's tricky when time is against us to cover these issues in the required level of detail, but thank you all for your time, and it's great to see you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll bring our next witnesses through. I just want to check if there are any actions arising from that. I mean, these really are largely evidence gathering sessions, but does anybody want to raise any actions arising?
I just have noted one. Rachel was going to come back to the committee in writing about documents relating to faith-based kids and good relations. Thank you.
Sure, can I raise a point?
Yeah, certainly. We're just waiting for next witnesses to come through, so if you want to add anything.
Yeah, listen, I thought that was a brilliant session. I thought it was very, very, very good and very illuminating. What I didn't enjoy was a couple of the members had referenced some of the questioning that was done by a couple of the other members, and I thought the question was genuinely fair, possibly robust, not even robust. I don't even think. I'm not even sure that I'm picking up something online here that's not in the room, but I didn't think it was appropriate for a couple of members to step in and say, and almost make an apology for questions that other members had made. I didn't get it. Guys, I'm not in the room, but I'm just not getting it. I thought it was a useful meeting.
No, thank you for that, Robbie. Obviously, if other members want to raise any concerns on that point, they're free to do so. I don't want this to be a lengthy discussion. Really keen to move through the agenda. So I'm going to ask for 30 seconds.
Yes, I'm not going to.
We will continue.
It's actually just on the idea, I know I've raised it a few times in the committee, but this idea that wanting a better representation of young people, I'm not saying that young people at large would be, it would be a more helpful view to me or anything if it was a wider consultation show, and I'm not actually trying to be pejorative to organisations like NICCY's youth panel or the youth assembly. I'm just actually, it's an interest of mine that actually if we're going to be serious about hearing from young people, It's making sure that the voices that we hear are as representative as possible. It's not about whether they're from my side or Pat's side or Michelle's side. It's more about making sure that we're hearing all of those voices and we're hearing them in a representative and appropriate way. It's certainly not to disparage or say that everybody that is in NICCY's group is of a particular political assuage. That's not my intention at all. So I can understand it comes across like that, but I'm just making sure that that's on the record. That's not the intention.
That's fine. So thanks for that, Robbie. Thank you for the clarification, David. So I'm happy if we bring through our next witnesses. So it's item 7 on the agenda, and it is again committee inquiry into RSE, and it's an oral briefing from the Catholic Schools Trustee Service. There's a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 124, and a briefing paper in your table papers from the Trustee Service, and that's at page 3 of your table papers. So I'll just let the witnesses get seated and settled, and then we'll make a start. So good afternoon. Thank you for giving up your time to brief the committee this afternoon. I'll just do quick introductions of the witnesses we have here, and then we'll make a start. So we have Fintan Murphy, Chief Executive of the Catholic Schools Trustee Service. We have Marie Maguire, Director of Pupil Services and Preventative Curriculum at St Ronan's College, Lurgan, and Mairead Green, Head of Year and RSE Coordinator at St Ronan's College, Lurgan. So you're very welcome, and actually it's very welcome to have teachers, practitioners here to brief the committee, because that's we don't always get the opportunity to hear from those directly in the profession, so that's really welcome. So we're going to move into our evidence session. So you have provided us with your briefing paper, which is much appreciated. We would be suggesting an initial presentation or opening remarks of up to 10 minutes, but by no means do you need to fill the 10 minutes. We want to leave as much time as possible for questions from members. We would be looking at 30 to 40 minutes for this session. So in terms of when it comes to members' questions, we could be in the realm of maybe sort of 3 minutes or so per inquiry. So the key is for members to get to their questions quickly, and for yourselves to get to the answers quickly, so that we can get through as much evidence as possible. So please don't be offended if I stop anybody mid-flow. We're going to just try and get through this to cover as much ground as we possibly can. But that's all from me at this stage. I'm very happy to hand over to yourselves.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you to all of the committee for inviting us along today. So we're just going to give a brief introduction, as you've suggested, and we'll take it from there. So the Catholic Schools Trustee Service works to assist the trustees of the Catholic family of schools in their responsibilities. And one aspect of this work relates to the development of the Catholic ethos of the schools based on the personal teachings and witness of Christ. In relation to relationships and sexuality education, we have collaborated closely with schools and others to develop a range of supports, including guidance documents, curricular materials and staff training materials, and have delivered training sessions to governors, school leaders and teachers. And in your pack that I sent you, all of the work that we've done has been detailed for you. Mm-hmm. Catholic schools seek to equip young people with skills, attitudes and values so that they become confident, capable, critical and discerning thinkers who are ready to contribute to and to shape their world and contribute to the common good. Catholic school recognises that upholding and protecting the dignity, self-esteem and self-worth of the individual is what provides a learning and teaching environment which enables their human potential to flourish. It's within this understanding that Catholic education seeks to develop the whole person, and one element of this development relates to RSE, since our human sexuality is integral to who we are as individuals. Central to our understanding of the human person is that we're all loved by God and created by God in His image and likeness. As such, every individual has innate dignity and deserves to be treated with respect at all times, and must also treat others with the same respect. In a world in which our young people are constantly bombarded by negative and potentially damaging images and messages relating to the human person, this Christian worldview offers them a positive understanding of who they are as valued individuals. Catholic schools deliver RSE within a morals and values framework based on love of God, love of self and love of neighbour, and encourages the young people to explore and develop faith, tolerance, justice, compassion, love, integrity, forgiveness and respect. This framework is provided to the young people invitationally and allows them, through discussion and debate, to explore choices, decisions and consequences of particular actions, so that as they mature, they reach their own clear understanding of themselves. Each school serves the needs of a particular school community, and as such it's appropriate that the RSE policy and curriculum are delivered with the needs of that specific community in mind. It's therefore important that schools continue to have the autonomy to determine the content, timing and delivery of appropriate RSE topics. While the RSE component is identified as an element of learning for life and work at post-primary level and of personal development and mutual understanding at primary school level, an RSE programme in a Catholic school, like the Catholic ethos, will permeate all areas of the curriculum.
From parents and carers. We understand that parents and carers are the first and most important educators of their children, and that school assists them in this role. School communities are the family of families, and all engage in determining the curriculum of the school, particularly in areas of development such as RSE. This involves schools consulting with parents and carers with regard to the policy and curricular offer for RSE, and where they wish to ensure that young people have the appropriate preparation for adult life ahead. We are mindful that parents, in exercising their right to have their children educated consistent with their physiological and religious belief, and have chosen to send their children to a Catholic school. We encourage schools to engage fully with parents in a consultation process and to make them aware of the curricular content offered in RSE, but also in the context of a clear rationale and policy of the school. So, for example, within our school, through the parent forum, parents felt that they didn't always know what was coming through in terms of the preventative curriculum, and we have moved that forward to map the preventative curriculum across the whole 7-year journey, but also to present that to parents and children in a parent-friendly version that's put out at the beginning of each term. And we feel that that has been a good way to engage parents in what we're doing. This can bring challenges, and indeed the growing multicultural nature of our society has added additional challenges around cultural norms and requires schools to engage in discussion, both seeking and understanding, to reassure parents. In some situations this will result in compromise, where a small number of children may not access parts of the proposed programme. The experience of many schools is that this compromise often results in parents reflecting on their decisions and agreeing to their child to participate in the future. It also ensures that good relationships between family and school can be maintained, which is in the best interest of the child. To ensure transparency, our schools are encouraged to make the detailed RSE programme available to parents, which offers them reassurance. For this reason, all the CSTS materials are publicly accessible on the website, and we encourage our schools to take a similar approach. Taking into account then students and young people, our schools exist to meet the needs of the communities, and particularly to meet the needs of our students. The school staff collaborating with parents are best placed to know the individual needs and circumstances of those students. Again, from a school perspective, we would encourage that the way that we do in our own school, that we use our pupil voice. We use it regularly to ask them about what their needs are, but also to reflect on programmes that are offered and tailor those programmes to suit the needs of the young people that we are working with. In assessing the needs, the voice of the child is important, and we encourage all our schools to ensure that the views of the young people are considered as part of the planning and delivery of RSE, as it is with all areas of school life. We note that the new ETI framework, which has been identified learning participation, meaningful consultation, learner-informed provision and active participation and engagement in the decision making. Such an approach in relation to RSE is most effective when the school has the autonomy to determine the policy, the curricular content, and specifically tailored to meet the needs of their pupils.
External providers. Research has shown that young people want RSE delivered by the people they know in a manner that is confident and informed. Schools will, however, want to determine if the use of external providers can enhance the school's offer. This may be because of specific expertise on a topic, or as an opportunity towards skilling up staff. All schools in using external providers are encouraged to meet with the provider to ensure that any programme offered fits within the school's policy and the wider RSE curricular offer. And at all times, the provider should be accompanied by school staff who can, as part of follow-up activities, explore the topics in an environment in which some young people may feel more comfortable. Curricular provision. A school RSE curriculum seeking to develop the whole person will ensure, as part of the consultation process, that the views of all within the school community are sought and considered. The curriculum offered across their time in school should provide the young people with a comprehensive understanding of all aspects of RSE, appropriate to the age and understanding of the young people. The curricular programmes offered by CSTS to schools cover a broad range of appropriate topics for the school to use. At primary level, this includes, for example, me, my family, my friends, keeping safe, growing and changing, decisions and consequences, puberty and new life. At post-primary level, topics covered include good and bad choices, building relationships, body image, consent, love and intimacy, sex and marriage, fertility awareness, pornography, and women's safety. All of the topics are explored through story and scenarios where the young people can discuss the Christian and other perspectives on these issues. How the topics are covered is determined by the school policy formulated in consultation with the wider school community and in consideration of and sensitive to the personal circumstances of the young people and their families. It is important to note that the RSE curriculum is only one of the wider aspects of the wider preventative and pastoral curriculum offered by a school, and time limitation is one significant factor in schools' determination of what can be covered in a curriculum, which is just not about the acquisition of knowledge, understanding and skills, but is also about the development of attitudes, beliefs and values about sexual identity, relationships and intimacy. That's conclusion.
Thank you all for that. Really helpful opening presentation, and I think actually some of the things there, again, hearing some of that direct stuff from schools is really helpful in terms of the priority given to engagement with parents, engagement with young people, and it was really welcome to hear some of that. I want to just maybe pick up on some of the discussions we had in our previous evidence sessions. We had the Children's Commissioner in to get a sense of your organisation's view. They had set out, and I think actually it was agreed helpfully by all members, that in terms of the role of values in RSE being delivered in schools, they set out a sort of scenario of a age-appropriate, scientifically accurate, comprehensive RSE curriculum, but with space around that to discuss the values and the moral and ethical considerations. What would the Catholic Schools Trustee Service view be of that approach to delivering RSE? I'm not asking you to endorse NICCY's views on any other issue, I just mean in terms of that particular aspect of our conversation.
I suppose for us, all of our education is delivered in the context of a particular set of values. It's a value-based education process that we offer in our schools. So in looking at RSE, that's just another area of the curriculum that we deliver in that way. But in relation to your question, I suppose we make sure that while we are offering the young people a particular perspective, we also ensure that they have a conversation about other perspectives, which might be their own view, might be the views of other people. So, for example, the legislative framework would be included in our programme so that they're made fully aware of all of the information that we believe should be available to young people. But we put it in a particular framework in which they consider, what does that mean for me as an individual?
That's helpful. And then just to maybe expand on that, I had a look at some of that, and thank you for your briefing paper that you sent through. You one of the links in that was the post-primary RSE guidance booklet that you'd produced, and it used a phrase that values, when speaking about the values aspect of this, that will be respectfully proposed to young people while listening and being attentive to their lived experiences. So that was in that document. So can you give a bit more detail about how the resources and guidance that you provide for schools and boards of governors do ensure that the lived experiences of a diverse range of young people are clearly addressed in the delivery of RSE?
Maybe if one of you wanted maybe to explain a little bit about, say, one of the topics, or how, so we would tend to introduce topics maybe through a video clip or a story. And then the young people have an opportunity to discuss that. Maybe you want to take us through?
So we have just our curriculum mapped really from year 8 to 14, and I'm just going to speak about maybe consent. That can be addressed at a very young age, in year 8 or year 9, not really in a sexual sense, but in consent as in it's okay to say no. This is the age when post-primary school, where friendships might have broken down from primary school. And, it is okay not to be friends with anybody anymore. And it's okay to say, no, I don't think we should be friends anymore. And that's where we start to talk about that introduction of that vocabulary of consent and what is consent. And then from then, we then move on into, it's brought up again in year 12, where we look then at women's safety. And consent is brought in there again, as Fintan says, through scenarios, the resources. We look at sexual harassment, where a scenario might be that you're at a party and a male comes over and might, put your hand around your waist just as an informal get to know you. But that's an opportunity for discussion, because that has been done without your consent. And then the children are educated on how to be active about that, how could we approach that differently. Then we come to year 13, post 16, where the pupils are a bit older, and that's where we really talk about, consent in the legal sense. And we talk about sexual activity there. And this is all done within our value-based education that we have from Catholic education there.
That's fine. I'm happy to leave it at that stage. I'll pass over to Deputy Chair if you want to come in.
Thanks, Chair. I want to come at it at a slightly different angle. Just what's the view of your organisation in regard to the legislation concerning the delivery of RSE?
The current legislation that we have very specifically says that the RSE is delivered in the context of the ethos of the school. And for us that's very important, because all of our education is delivered in the context of the ethos of our schools. The fact that we have a fairly minimal content in terms of what's prescribed is helpful, because if we want to engage the young people and the parents and community, we want to know what is important to them right now in the group of children who are there. So, for example, when we produce the Flourish materials, which are our primary materials, because the materials are produced for use right across this island, some of the upper primary materials were originally designed for children who would be a year older in the Republic of Ireland, who would be at school. And we had a conversation with our schools about, do we take those out? And some of our schools said, we wouldn't cover that, our children aren't ready for it. Other schools said, oh no, please leave it in the context of our school. We have reason why we do need to cover that. So the flexibility in the curriculum currently allows for schools to do that. The other fact is having a minimal content curriculum allows for schools to look at some of these issues in depth. So if we take the example that Maria's just talked about, consent could be, one 10-minute conversation on legally you can't do this unless you ask and somebody agrees to consent. That's a consent curriculum. Or we can have a consent curriculum, as Maria has described, which is the whole process of understanding what does consent mean for me, how do I understand it to another person, when I say no, are they clear what I mean by that, and to allow the young people time to go through a full understanding of something like consent is a significant piece of work that sits within the wider preventative curriculum that the school offer. But where schools wish to look at some topics in more detail than others, the flexibility in the current curriculum allows them to do that and allows them to be responsive to the young people. And if you look through some of our training video materials, you'll see some of the young people describing and indeed some of the teachers in our schools, describing conversations with the young people in school where the young people said, we want to learn more about whatever the topics are. And by having a minimal content, that allows the school the flexibility to look at some topics in greater detail than maybe they would have been able to do otherwise.
And just in terms of some of the topics or aspects of the RSE curriculum, and some of them wouldn't be in line with the teaching of the Catholic Church, but can you give an assurance that the schools under your remit will still be able to deliver comprehensive RSE in line with the legislation? And you've talked about students, for example, wanting to talk about different issues, and you have the flexibility to do that. So, for example, if children or young people wanted to talk about abortion, would the schools under your remit be willing to have that discussion?
Our schools have covered topics like abortion for a long time, long before the current legislation was actually brought in. In fact, a lot of our schools would cover it as part of GCSE ethics module. So there really aren't any topics as such that our schools would have a difficulty delivering. They would deliver them from a particular perspective. So if our schools were talking about abortion, they would talk about an understanding of human life from conception to death. But they would also talk about the reality that legally it is possible to have an abortion. And they would encourage the students to get involved in conversations and discussions about, what does that mean for me? How do I feel about these issues? So there really aren't any areas that couldn't be covered. But I suppose from a values-based point of view and a faith-based education point of view, we think it's important that we offer the children a particular view invitationally, but also allow them to discuss, the fact that there are other views, that other individuals within the class might have different views. Certainly others within society might have different views, and all of those are available. Do you want to talk a little bit about your...
So just in year 12, abortion is set in the context of a unit called Matters of Life and Death that also looks at assisted dying as well. So it looks at the whole journey from conception to death and all the issues that are around that. There's a series of lessons within year 12. So it starts off with personhood, looking at pro-life, and then it goes into other groups who may disagree with the Catholic view on that, and the pupils will evaluate that. So they look at both sides of the argument. So they look at the Anglican Church, they look at feminists, humanists. So they look at all groups and all views and are able to argue an argument for or against. That's what they do in abortion. And then they look at the legislation in the UK and the Republic of Ireland as well within that. And I suppose the reason why they do that is to offer respectively alternative perspectives on this issue and to engage in dialogue with them. But within that, we will not avoid teaching what the Church professes on the Catholic beliefs on just the dignity of the child.
Can I just add as well, just in terms of the flexibility, we have found, just that there's a lot of things that will come through in the media, and you would say misogyny and that whole Andrew Tate scenarios, and there's very much, you have to be pushed to teach and and I know there's pushed curriculums for that. We haven't necessarily seen that on the ground. So I think we need to have the ability to respond to what we're seeing on the ground with certain topics, and that's why, having that flexibility in curriculum is so important.
Sure. Michelle, you had indicated next.
Thank you, and thanks for your time and for the answers so far. It's really appreciated. I noticed you have mentioned and referred to that your own materials on RSE that you've produced, so I'm just wondering, how did you engage and collaborate with young people when developing those?
We have pupil voice for us, but it's very much encouraged throughout all schools.
So maybe if I take you through our direct materials, and then maybe they can talk about their own school experience. So for our materials that we've drawn up, we have primary and post-primary materials. They were drawn up Some of them initially drawn up as samples of activities that then were used in schools by young people with the teachers, so the teachers could comment back on how useful they found them. That involved parents as well in the conversation around that. And our post-primary materials, which we have piloted in this is September, so last school year. At the end of the year, we actually we identified a small number of schools who were given a survey to send to their students, and the students and staff separately have been able to comment on what it is they want. As we now develop the Key Stage 4 materials, the student voice has been very directly involved in them discussing what it is they feel is missing from or needs to be part of their curriculum as we develop it into the future. So I suppose partly we've created the materials online because that allows us to hear what schools want, hear what students want, and to evolve the materials as issues arise. That, you know, there are a few issues kind of in schools now that, you know, some of the social influencers, for example, that's not something we thought about 5 years ago. So because it's available as an online resource, we can modify and bring in new modules over time as the needs of the schools evolve. So maybe do you want to say a little bit about your own school's experience as a student?
Do you know, in terms of using materials and having materials like that as a base is great, you know, as a starting point. Do you know that you're not starting just from scratch and coming up with things, and also listening to all the evidence that have come from other schools, right? We've used these materials, they're good, you know, they've been useful, but you might need just an adjustment. What we do is we refer very much to using our pupil voice in school, and what we'll ask is we'll run an initial programme. Is there any topics that you'd be interested in the coming year? And we would try to then incorporate those into the programmes. And then at the end of the time, we also do the reflection back to, you know, what was good, what didn't do so well, what wasn't of any use to you, basically. Because, as Fintan was saying, there are things that we plan. Our lives are so different, you know, regardless of how in touch you feel that you are with them, they're so different and so removed. And if you don't ask the children and you don't engage them, you're never going to give them what they need. And that's why it's so important that we keep that dialogue and that conversation open with them, because we can't even begin to imagine really what their lives are like. Thank you.
Peter, you'd indicated next.
Oh, thanks very much, Nick. I had visions of Fintan doing a TikTok for in terms of this area, which would be quite something.
I have great confidence in your thinking I have that level of ability.
I'm sure you can find that deep within you somewhere, Fintan. Could I ask what value or importance would you guys attach to the ethos of the school, particularly within the Catholic sector? I mean, how important is that?
Well, I suppose in a general sense, every school, every business, every organisation has worked out that actually if we all agree how we do something, we do it better. For our schools, because our ethos is very much focused on gospel values, all of our schools have a standard, you know, to compare themselves against and to assess how good we are at particular things, how well we're developing in particular areas, what areas we need to develop further in. So when schools are asking questions about their ethos, and an ethos that particularly says, you know, the individual is the most important, our school is focused on ensuring that every individual in school feels a sense of respect and dignity and support, and that everybody in the school is there to help meet their needs and to develop them. You know, and I think in that context, we are clearer what we are doing. It's also clearer for parents. So when parents decide, and we mentioned that in the briefing, and when parents decide, I am choosing a Catholic school for my child, they are choosing that for a particular reason. Parents make choices about all kinds of schools, and they make them for good reasons. So, you know, but it's an important part of our schools is that we demonstrate our ethos, and we offer it to the students as we offer it to the parents, and people then select it based on what it is that they expect us to offer. So we have, I suppose, a contract with the whole school community. If you join our school, this is the package that you're signing up for, and we will do our best to deliver to you.
And just quickly, just following on, is that important? So you described in there like a package and a contract. Do you think that having that choice, because we're obviously talking about, I mean, we're talking about transformation earlier on, and I assume some of that is about the amount of schools we have and what sort of sectors of schools we have and so forth. Do you think that choice, that parents can choose schools that perhaps have a particular ethos or value system or value base, or come from a particular perspective, and some other parents might decide, actually, that's not quite what I want for my child, I prefer my child to be educated here. Is that choice important? Because, you know, as you tailed off that question, it certainly sounded like it. Is that choice important, that parents have the ability to pick a school that reflects perhaps their own personal values or ethos or faith?
Yeah, I suppose if I put it in this context, you know,
a brief answer on this one. So
it is perfectly acceptable to support Liverpool or Manchester United or Spurs or whoever you wish to support. They're all. I
mean, he might take all. You know,
that's very debatable. Other options do exist, but they all exist. You know, they're all slightly different, but they all play football. So for our schools, we have different schools. You know, people choose actually within sector to go to one school rather than another, or they choose other sectors. And I know it's kind of, it's always been a conversation piece in Northern Ireland about our sectors. Actually, if you look at all of the school types and choices in other jurisdictions, like in England, they have many, many more choices than you would have available to you here.
Thank you. Kathy, you had indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask around, we've heard from other groups who are organisations that maybe go into schools to deliver RSE. What's your view on that?
So, what you're trying to do with the young people is to provide them with the broadest curriculum offer available. And you can do that with your own staff, or you can do that with additional expertise. With some of the, I'm going to call them newer topics maybe, or some topics that people feel less comfortable with. The young people have said they want the person who's delivering the topic to be knowledgeable and confident, and ideally one of their own teachers. Mm-hmm. So I suppose the ideal we would start from is the knowledgeable, confident member of staff. But if you haven't got that level of knowledge and confidence, maybe bringing in an external organisation helps to boost that. And we would always say that, you know, before you bring an organisation in, you make sure they understand what you're trying to deliver and you clarify what they offer. But there are also so many overlaps. So, for example, you know, schools would bring in, when you're looking at preventative curriculum, NSPCC, they offer very specific pieces that become part of your RSE programme. They're just delivering elements of it. And as long as the students are clear that the staff have brought that programme in for a purpose, and the students will have an opportunity afterwards to talk about it further, to explore the issues further, then it can be very useful. But I think in the main what it's doing is skilling up the teachers that are there, so that hopefully we get to a point that the vast majority of the programme can be delivered by the teachers that they're used to on a day-to-day basis. Maybe if you want to talk a little bit about your experience.
Our experience would be we strive to deliver as much as we can through our curriculum and through our staff. If we bring an external provider in, it's really to enhance the experience. Mm-hmm. It's to enhance what has been taught in the classroom. So previously we have had Relate NI in to discuss issues with our children. And when we do have an external agency in, we have a service level agreement with those where we will meet and discuss the ethos of the school. So if they're coming into our school, it's still set in the context of our values and our very much our ethos, so that the message is consistent for the children there.
And it's nice having sometimes a different voice coming in, but ideally we are looking for it to come from the familiarity, the people that the children know, the people that they're confident to engage with and to ask their questions with. And I know that we've talked before about training, that, you know, I'm not sure if you're all aware as well, that if you're teaching the elements of the preventative curriculum, for the majority of teachers, it's an add-on, and really over time we haven't been getting training, we haven't been getting the resources put into that that's needed to have those confident, competent delivery of those areas that, that can be challenging to stand up and deliver, and we're just not getting that level of support in schools at the minute. As I say, the materials are there and they're great, but we do need that staff development.
And what do you think needs to be done to give staff, I suppose, the confidence to not maybe have to bring external providers in? I know what you're saying is that there'll always be niches. I think it was like human trafficking, those guys. I know that would be it's difficult for a teacher to know everything in depth, but I understand how maybe children might feel, more trust their teacher more or something. So what do you feel it needs to be done to give teachers that confidence and that support?
I think there has to be, and a
brief answer on this one. Sorry,
there really will have to be an investment. Like one of the things is, and you're welcome to have a look at that. I have mapped the curriculum across the whole 7 years for all the preventative elements, and RSE is, a central part of that. But there's so many other elements of that. So it's like being, a jack of all trades but a master of none, and that's really what this area is being pigeonholed in at the minute. And I really think there needs to be investment around having either specialist staff or specialist training. And that's how, if you want to see the results, that's where I think that it has to be examined.
Okay, thanks.
David, you had indicated next.
Thanks very much, and thanks for your presentation so far. I think it's been enlightening, because I think it helps get us away from the idea that those who are interested in having faith be a factor in all of this are trying to in some way indoctrinate or shut out other views, because I think from a faith point of view on all manner of issues that doesn't work. And if it did work, our churches would probably be brimming full in a way that they're probably not. But that it is about encouraging that discussion and making sure that everybody can have respectful understanding of each other, but also voice what their lived experience is, as the chair referred to earlier. And I think that you've shone a bit of light on that. I just have one question which I was interested around the opt-out, and quite often we're talking about should we have an opt-out, a parental opt-out, or should we not. I noticed within your briefing you talked about the nature of the opt-out and the withdrawal process, and that you, and some sympathy actually reading it, that the opt-out once applied for then can apply across the year, but actually a bit like we've been talking about, or I had been saying earlier in the committee, quite often we're talking past each other, because so many of these issues, consent, safeguard and all of that, we all care about, we all want our kids to have that information. But there are elements that are more controversial, and we all know what those elements are. How would you, if we were to have an opt-out, how would you reform the opt-out system in order to allow it to be more flexible, so that it doesn't affect those crucial issues that I would say the vast majority of parents will want their kids to receive, whether they're religious or they're not?
So I suppose we would start from the position, first of all, that parents are the first educator. Parents know their children best, and parents should be given the opportunity to express a particular view about particular things. For most parents, they also have confidence in their school. So when I was a school principal, if I said we are going to teach X, whatever it was, the vast majority of parents knew that I was doing what I was doing in the best interest of their children. However, there are always a small number of parents, and one of the issues that's come up in schools more recently, we have a lot more children and families who have now come from other cultures into Northern Ireland, who have particular views, as indeed we have some families who are already here who have particular views. And in most cases, a conversation with the staff, with the principal, looking at the materials is sufficient for them to say, okay, I understand why that's important, that's okay. But in some cases, they will say, no, I don't want my child involved in that particular piece. Now, the choice then for schools is, do we try to override the parents, which is not a great thing when we're trying to build a relationship with the family. The second issue then will be, okay, so I don't want my child doing that, but there's a talk on whatever at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock tomorrow. I don't want my child involved in that talk. So as a school, I can either say, okay, we'll make an arrangement for your child from 2 to 2:30, or no, we can't make an arrangement. You have to do it as part of the curriculum, in which case the parent will keep the child at home for the whole day. So I think there should be I think we've described it in the documents as there are situations where compromise is required. So whether you have a very formalised opt-out where they have to sign off, because some of these topics, flow. So for example, abortion being one of the areas where you can sign off. But actually, you heard the description of the programme in St. Ronan's. It runs over a number of weeks. It's not a discrete piece that you can lift someone out of. So there needs to be flexibility in that. And in most cases where parents have had an opt-out option, if we call it that, I know that's not great language for it, but the fact that they know it's available to them in many, many cases means they don't use it. Or those who might use it this year actually realise, maybe I overreacted, and they're happy to let their child participate in a future lesson or a future activity. So the issue with the current arrangement is when you opt out, you're opting out for the whole year. Because it's very formal, it makes it much more difficult for a parent to kind of let the child back in again. So a more fluid, informal arrangement with the school where there can be an understanding with the parent and the school, I think, is more effective. Albeit I'm not sure how you put that into legislation.
If I just have a follow-up question,
Can I just say, to put it in context as well, and I don't believe we're going to be bombarded with loads of opt-outs. So in a school of our size, if we're talking about approximately 1,780 pupils, when we put out our consultation, we had one person.
That's really interesting, and I think that's kind of, again, I was very clear at this. It's great to have people who are educators here because we hear the reality on the ground. I just wanted to follow on from David's question, because we discussed this in a lot of detail in the last session around opt-outs, and my view is very much that if a parent approaches to seek an opt-out, that should be the beginning of a conversation. It shouldn't just be, it's box ticked and we move on. With that in mind, and I really welcome the real focus on making sure there is then a conversation that happens with parents. I think that's crucial. And any schools I know of locally that have delivered RSEs successfully, the parents have been involved in that process. So I'm absolutely on board with that. When an opt-out request is made, is there also, again, age appropriate, but is there also a conversation with the young person impacted, so that their views are also heard, just to make sure there is a balance there? Is that
in the conversation from our perspective, and I know certainly is what we've talked about encouraging, is that the young person's most definitely involved, because that's impacting their own right to education or right to access that part, and that they would have been part of that conversation with the parent. In my instance, with the parent and the child. Now, I genuinely believe what Fintan had said was that the parent objected to this year. Their child actually wasn't going to have the delivery this year. They were objecting in principle to the topic. But down the line, I do believe that parent maybe will come back on board, because they're seeing that the school is open, and I think the more we encourage that, as Fintan had said, that encouragement of the dialogue with parents, with children, you will start to be able to, through relationships, move people forward as well.
That's great. Look, I apologise, I jumped in on David's question, so I'll not labour the point, but that's all been really helpful. Last indication I've got is Danny here.
Yeah, I'm very brief. Thank you very much. I suppose just talking to many young people on this, and they really do want a comprehensive RSE throughout their life learning. How do you guarantee the consistency throughout the school estate? Because many of the young people I talk to, one school does better than another school, and they could be all in Catholic maintained schools, if you know what I mean. So it's just how do you balance that? Is it down to maybe the principals or the teachers themselves in that relationships, or on what support then can be given?
Yeah, so I suppose, from a CSDS point of view, what we've tried to do is engage the schools. So as you'll know from the paper I sent you, we produced a document and guidance on how they write policy. Then we produced an actual teaching resource for them. The most recent thing we've produced is actual training modules for the schools to have conversations internally about what they're going to do and why they'll do it. So, for example, there's a training module included on sensitive subjects, how you deal with sensitive subjects. Now, at a school level, you will have different skills and confidence and priorities, like you have with everything else. We will continue to do training with governors, and we are planning a programme of governor training in spring when the new governors are all in post, and we will be raising this issue again and saying, you know, you as governors are responsible for this. You need to be having conversations. You need to be clear about where is this in your school's development plan, what is the current policy, what is the current curriculum. But like all topics, schools are at a different place. You mentioned about young people having different experiences. One of the things that we discovered, so before we started all this work, the trustees actually engaged St Mary's University in Twickenham to do some research on RSE delivery in schools. And they did work in surveys, they met students, they met teachers, they met parents. When they went into schools first, the young people said to them, "Oh no, we don't do RSE." So they immediately went to the senior leadership team and said, "Oh, the kids are telling us you don't do RSE here." And they said, "Right, okay, ask them, do they do work on consent?" "Oh yeah, we do work on consent." "Ask them, do they do work on a relationship?" "Oh, we do work on relationships." So actually there were lots of things being done, but in the past maybe they weren't described in that language of being RSE. Now there are some topics I have no doubt that some schools aren't yet fully confident to deliver at this point. I would like to think it's a developing process and that schools are moving forward. I think St Ronan's a very good example of a school who have a very clear, laid out curriculum for RSE. Again, if you watch our videos, you'll hear from lots of other schools that are part of that programme who are able to similarly describe, clear, well laid out programmes. But I suppose we've been working on this since 2017. And COVID came along. Then industrial action came along. So there have been lots of reasons why schools haven't moved forward in the last few years. Not just in RSE, but there are so many issues. And individual schools have identified, a development plan over the next couple of years. Some of those schools it will include RSE. Some of them have other priorities at the moment. But I would hope that, one of the things that the post-COVID experience has taught schools is pupil well-being is key. RSE is fundamental to pupil well-being. So I think schools will see that this is an important area that they need to develop. And I think, there's certainly a lot more work going on in schools now than there was some years ago, and hopefully that will continue to develop.
Thank you.
Okay, so Robbie is asking to come in, so I'll just bring Robbie in for the last contribution on this, and ask Robbie just to be mindful of time as we're very, very much up against it right now with another evidence session to follow. Robbie?
Thanks, Pat, Chair, and I will be brief. It basically follows on from Danny's question. I thought it was really good. From the perspective of ensuring that pupils that choose to go to a Catholic school get the same experience and are protected in an equal manner, what processes do you actually have in place to ensure and measure that young people do have access at the very least to a linear and universal compendium of information in this regard, regardless of whether it's one of the more controversial topics or not? And I come up from the perspective of wanting to listen to the young people, and for those that want the information too, to be able to get that same information, and that the ethos, which should be threaded through, doesn't overrule the rights of every child there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I suppose in some ways the question you're asking is who checks? So it's not us. What we provide the schools with is materials over which we have confidence, that hopefully they have confidence in when they are delivering in schools, and that they have confidence that the materials we have are consistent with the ethos of the school. We take opportunities when we train governors and train other school leaders to say to them, this is an important part of the development of the whole person that you need to have responsibility for. But ultimately, it comes down to conversations at a school level of what is their current priority, and governors ensuring that they have a clear understanding of that. And then at a school level, we have schools who use monitoring and evaluation to clarify that what they're doing is consistent with the needs of the students. And maybe, do you want to say a little bit about your student evaluation processes?
Yeah, we're saying that we do the pupil voice, right through the time, and that'll be to direct the idea of what type of programmes to do, but also a reflection. And sometimes even in the reflection, it could be in the type of delivery mode that was used. You know, we have been talking to pupils about, you know, more even online facilities. It's again just getting the skill base for staff to be in a position to do that, or using organisations. But just we had a recent visit from the ETI and for their new inspection process, and that whole area of wellbeing and pupil wellbeing and safeguarding and all of that is one of the, obviously the core of the new inspection regime. So that will also be the checking off the process for every school. Obviously for us within the context of what we're delivering in our needs, but actually that check is going to be there within the core, one of the 9 core areas for inspections when they come in.
Okay, thank you. And finally, one in this, if it's okay. There's no opt out for a school, but and I understand that we're getting into the weeds here a wee bit with the individual ethos of individual schools here. But I take it that there is a confidence that all schools will be delivering an element of the minimum content in line with the material.
Just very briefly, even a yes or no is fine.
I mean,
yeah, at least it looks good.
What we've provided schools with it goes way beyond minimum content. We have a very comprehensive programme for schools, and it's up to the schools to determine what they deliver, when and how much time they can devote to it within the school day. And that's, I suppose, the factor that's creating the difference from one school to another at the moment. But that applies across every other area of the curriculum as well.
Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground there. We'd sort of aimed for shorter briefings in this, but actually there was a lot of really good stuff in there. So I really do thank you all for your time there. It was all very helpful. So thank you
very much. Sure.
Thank you very much. So just quickly check. I don't think there's anything in terms of follow-up actions other than to obviously ensure that information's all fed in. I'm happy to carry on. We have a big agenda. If anybody needs to leave the room for a comfort break, you're free to do so. But I'm going to bring the next witnesses in. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to close for a second then.
No, I think just bring the witnesses through. Yeah.
Can I? Yeah. I have to put it in closed.
Okay, we are going to move into closed session as the clerk needs to leave, so we can't function without the clerk. So there we go.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
So we'll just let the witnesses get seated and settled, and then we'll make a start. We have another member who's just nipped out, but we'll be back in, and we have Robbie who's online. I'll just let you get seated. So good afternoon. You're both very welcome here. I'll just start by referring members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 126, and then we have some other materials that have come through from NICCY, Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman. Sorry, I shouldn't use acronyms. There's an overview report on the use of restrictive practices in Northern Ireland schools at page 128. And then also a briefing paper at page 12 of tabled papers, and the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman School Case Digest at page 15 of tabled papers. So thank you for providing those in advance. I'll just do quick introductions and then we'll get started. So with us today from NICCY we have Sean Martin, the Deputy Ombudsman and Director of Investigations at NICCY, and we have Julie Healy, the Head of Improvement, Engagement and Impact at NICCY. So you are very welcome here today. We're very conscious the extent to which, and I think your briefing paper, the material you sent actually indicates just how much your work crosses over with this committee, and I think it's quite clear from the material you sent there's quite an uptick in the level of educational cases coming your way. So it is really great to have you here. We know you've submitted the briefing paper on restrictive practices, and I know that's been an issue of great interest to this committee, both in this mandate and previously. So members may wish to raise issues on that, but we've also had a number of conversations in recent weeks around school governance and the volume of correspondence we receive as a committee around concerns with individual schools and briefings that individuals seek to make. So it's very welcome to maybe get a sense of where NICCY's role in some of that complaint process might sit. But at this stage I'm going to hand over and ask for an initial opening presentation, up to 10 minutes, but absolutely no pressure to treat that as a target. Shorter than 10 minutes is absolutely fine, and then we move into question and answer. Now we usually give 5 minutes per inquiry, inquiry for a member in a normal evidence session. We are a wee bit up against it in terms of time, so we might cut that short, but I would just ask for everybody to be getting to questions and to really to succinct, clear answers as quick as possible. And please don't be offended if I cut anyone short on that basis. So at that point, over to yourselves.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair and members as well for the invitation to present about the role of NICCY. So I'm largely just going to flesh out the briefing paper in terms of what the office does with a focus on our role as Public Services Ombudsman. So as the paper says, there are 3 distinct statutory jurisdictions within the office. The biggest, which we will address today, is the Public Services Ombudsman. By virtue of holding that role, the Ombudsman is also the Northern Ireland Local Government Commissioner for Standards, where we have the function of both investigating and adjudicating where appropriate on the Code of Conduct in relation to councillors. And the third and smallest area of our work is the Northern Ireland Judicial Appointments Ombudsman, which is about applicants for judicial office being able to complain to us about that process. So NICCY's vision is really about making things better for people and public services. We are not an advocate for one side or the other. Independence is one of our values and really important to us, but what we are is an advocate for fairness in the delivery of public services and the way that complaints are dealt with. So we deliver our service through 5 strategic themes: accessibility, engagement, making a difference, modernisation and innovation, and demonstrating and delivery value, and they guide all of what we do. So I think what we will focus on is our Public Services Ombudsman role, which is 3 distinct functions within that as well. So our complaint investigation, our ability to set standards for handling complaints, and then our own initiative powers. So a person who has exhausted the complaints process of a public body can bring a complaint to the Ombudsman, and public bodies are required to signpost to us at the end of their process. So quite often people will approach us before they have gone to the public body. We couldn't deal with that volume of complaints, and nor is it a good thing. Those are complaints about the public service. We expect public services to deal helpfully, promptly with their own complaints, and only those that can't be resolved should come to us for us to then look at and see if there are any areas where there have been failings and there's a need for the organisation to address those. We do that function as openly as we can. So we will publish the majority of our further investigation decisions. We tend not to publish decisions about schools, very small public bodies, and in essence, by publishing those reports, we would probably identify individuals. Our jurisdiction is about public bodies, not individuals. So I think we have produced a school digest so that we are putting information about school complaints, or we may well then publish a more detailed summary of a complaint, but not say where the school is, and thereby ensure that people learn from that. So we have a broad range of the public service that's covered, and within jurisdictions that includes health and social care, education, housing, central and local government, and lots of other ALBs and NDPBs. So basically all public services are within the jurisdiction of the Ombudsman for the issues around maladministration, and then for health and social care that goes to the professional judgments in your care and treatment that are made. So I think health is obviously the biggest. Education forms between 10 and 15% of the complaints to the office. Chair, as you have said, the numbers have been going up, but actually as a percentage of our overall complaints, it's been fairly static. Usually in 12-13% of our annual complaints are about education, with the majority of those about schools. So last year we had 1,173 complaints. I think we have a table for the complaints in education in the back of the briefing paper. This year we're projecting, based on half-year figures, to receive between 1,250 and 1,300 complaints. So when we average it out, we've had a 15% year-on-year increase in the complaints coming to the office, which is why... Sorry, could I interrupt you? Just, is that for complaints about schools or complaints in general?
Complaints in general. So schools have matched that. So as a percentage of our overall complaints, they've stayed static, which means they're also going up. And the issues that people are complaining about have remained fairly static, and I will touch on what those issues are. I say what we look at is administration, and in the complaints process, the Board of Governors are given a particular role in terms of the guidance issued by the Education Authority.
I have seen a school complaints process recently that went to 5 stages, which is exhausting for anyone. It's not supposed to be how it should work and not what we're advocating in terms of our complaint standards. How do we make decisions? We look at what the legislative requirements are, what policy says should happen, or what good practice or guidance looks like, and then as well we use the principles of good administration and good record keeping as guides for us. So I'd say in terms of those complaints that we receive, they cover a huge range of issues, from special education needs, bullying, following procedures. Some of the things that we find are really poor communication with those who've raised complaints. A failure to keep any records of considerations is a recurring theme. A lack of respect and empathy for people and their experiences comes through. Board of Governors who I think have limited training in the role that they have, particularly around complaints. I think there is training there, but we're not seeing evidence of it being followed. And the need for them to be that critical friend to the leadership in the school, and to both support the leadership in the school, but where legitimate concerns have been brought to them, to be that critical friend, and then to look to see what can be done to improve things. In terms of one of the other functions we have, complaint standards, the Assembly have given us the statutory mandate to set complaint standards for the public sector. So a set of complaints handling principles were approved by the Assembly following a public consultation in January 2022. Since then, we have worked with the local government sector and have introduced a model complaints handling procedure for them. Over the next 3 years, we are about to roll that out right across the public sector. So we're currently working with health and social care trusts and are quite down the road with them. Then we're going to quickly move on. So the process should be the same no matter which part of the public sector you go to. So it's 2 stages. Focused on early resolution. So the first stage is about, can we resolve this for the person as quickly as possible, listen to them, understand their experience, see if we can resolve it, and if we can't, then a fair and independent investigation, which again should be focused on learning, acknowledging any mistakes, and then trying to make things better. So we're going to roll that out across the public sector. 5 days to respond to stage 1, 20 working days to respond to stage 2, and I say we hope across the next 3 years to progress that quite quickly. So the third of our statutory functions within the Public Services Ombudsman sphere is power of own initiative. So the Ombudsman doesn't need a complaint to use this power, but she must have a reasonable suspicion that there is systemic maladministration. We have a set of criteria that we've put on our website around how we decide how we use the resource that we have and direct to it. So what we have done so far is look at the use of further evidence in personal independence payments. We published a report on that. And we have done a follow-up report to see how DFC have got on with introducing those recommendations. We have more recently did Forgotten, which was a report about how our health and social care trusts and the system communicates with patients on waiting lists. We have made recommendations and we've been following up with the department around progress on that. We've done the overview report on restrictive practices in schools and also one protecting our roots, which was about how we use tree preservation orders to protect our trees. So that is a power that we have that is not available to any other public services ombudsman across the UK. When the Executive Office Committee modernised our legislation back in 2016, they did bring it right up to standard. There's a set of principles around how an ombudsman operates called the Venice Principles for the protection and promotion of ombudsmen, and Peter Tyndall, the then president of the International Ombudsman Institute, complemented what the Assembly put in place for our Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman. So in terms of those breakdown of complaints and key themes of complaints in education, you will see them there. So we had a total of 149 complaints last year. You'll see how that's risen across those 3 years and the breakdown in terms of school types, with obviously primary school and post-primary schools being the largest quantity of complaints. And as I say, I've alluded to those key themes, so I won't repeat myself given the pressure of time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. I think that there's two issues. We did note the restraint and seclusion, as I mentioned at the start, but I'm going to just focus on the governance side within schools at the moment, because that is something that is quite live. But I want to be very clear. I would hope to hear from you again on restraint and seclusion. I think as the statutory guidance comes through from the department, given your history of work in that space, so we really would hope to have you in front of us before on that issue. In terms of the complaints in relation to schools, and particularly in the main, or always, you're complaining about a board of governors. They're the complaints managing authority. Some of the evidence that I would hear anecdotally is that when things go through the system and end up with NICCY, that there can be a barrier, perhaps in terms of your powers, if it is not an individual child or parent who has suffered an injury, if a parent is maybe raising a concern about something systemic within that school, maybe they don't think the governance is up to standard, or they think there is an issue around the decision-making process within the board, or they think that there is something flawed there that's causing a systemic issue in the school. The sense we get is that potentially falls out of your remit. So can you clarify that for us? I mean, if there isn't a particular, I don't mean physical injury necessarily, but to an injury suffered, where does that sit in terms of your powers?
So the requirement to bring a complaint to us is that you allege you have suffered an injustice as a result of maladministration. So in this case, looking at a school. So I suppose there is a general view that it is about an individual parent or child's interaction with the school, and that has resulted in some impact, whether on their education or their well-being more generally. So I suspect that that's what you're referring to. Now, I would like to see, and if you would like to contact us afterwards, to just maybe explore in more detail what those issues are. If it's more about the policy of the school and how it determines, that's probably not a complaint that we would consider. If it's about the governance of the school and there is something that flows from that in terms of an impact on the children, and someone makes a complaint, I would have thought we could look at that. It's probably nuanced, and it would depend on the issue. And I would think, if there's an opportunity to follow up afterwards around specifics, then certainly I would be happy to look at that and see where those lines are. But broad policy issues, the Board of Governors are set to determine, the school development plan and the broad policy for the school, and its disagreement with that. Now, people could complain about the process. So should it have been consulted on, where parents and families' views taken into account? But on that issue, what is the minimum thing to bring a complaint to us? It is, did you allege you've suffered an injustice as a result of maladministration?
And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just to make sure I'm understanding that. So matters of policy, we don't like the direction of the school, or we feel there's something culturally not right, or we think that the Board of Governors are we don't think that they're transparent enough. That those are in general, if there's not an individual impacted by that, those are in general things that may be more difficult, may present challenges for you to pick up.
Some of those are absolutely really difficult for us to look at, and probably not within the scope. Things like openness, transparency, involvement of parents. I would have thought we could start to look at some of those, because the principles of good administration address those issues. So we would expect any public body to be as open as they can be around how they make their decisions, and to try and involve people in those decisions. So I say it would be very case specific as to what those issues are, but general direction of the school, probably not for us to impose our view on the view of the properly set up Board of Governors.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I'll ask one other question. You may or may not be able to answer this, but in terms of the current legislative framework, I think one of the things that we get through committee a lot is people want, either be it the EA or the department, sometimes to do something to intervene in a school if they're not content with the direction of travel with a school, or that they feel there's an issue. If someone is raising a red flag about something that they're saying is a serious concern within a school, do you feel that there are sufficient legislative powers for either department or EA, whoever the responsible body may be, to actually intervene, to say, hold on, we need to take a look at what's going on in this individual school? Or is there an unwillingness to use those powers, or is there a need for something more? But just to get a sense from dealing with these sort of matters, what your feeling would be.
Certainly we have had those issues brought to us in the past where I think sometimes there's maybe been a breakdown of the relationship between senior leadership in a school and the Board of Governors, and they're not necessarily acting in the best interests of children. So I suppose where we would sit as an office is always looking to the best interests of children and their educational attainment and well-being. So if that is impacting on children, then one would expect that that wouldn't be allowed to continue and that someone would intervene to resolve that issues. So one of the things I can think of, it's not directly applicable, but if you look at the Charity Commission, and there's a risk to charitable funds, the Charity Commission, while they themselves would never intervene and run a charity, they have the ability to put people in place to run that charity for a period of time to sort it out while then another board is elected. So same if, say, support for a Board of Governors and intervention to try and resolve the issue failed and there was an impact in children, that some statutory authority would have power to step in. I don't think it should always be the first action. I think support to resolve, and obviously, but always acting in the best interests of children and their educational attainment and their well-being.
Is your sense that those powers do exist, or are they required?
I wouldn't have a detailed knowledge of the legislation in education, but I have certainly seen a reluctance to intervene in the past. Whether that was a lack of legislative power or a lack of willingness, I'm not sure.
That's helpful. I might pick that up on actions arising, but no, I'm happy to leave it at that. Deputy Chair, do you want to go?
And I want to ask you about restraint and seclusion. And in the previous mandate, we heard some harrowing stories. I mean, one case, an autistic child who was stimming. The autistic children make these hand movements, and was in a mainstream class. The teacher considered it to be disruptive and tied the child's hands to the chair. And even in this mandate, we heard recently from a mother whose child was tethered to a fence, and she only found out when the school sent the yearbook home with all the photos on it, and there was clearly a photo of the child tethered to the fence, you know. And I know new guidance has been introduced, and can you tell us if that guidance has had any impact on these types of incidents?
So certainly, I mean, I had a discussion with the office in anticipation that we were coming to committee. We are still receiving complaints about restrictive practices. They tend to be more about children with additional needs who are in mainstream schools rather than in our special schools. So in terms of, are we seeing a significant shift away from the use of those restrictive practices? I don't think so yet. I say we still see very concerning information coming through about parents' experiences and how schools are equipped to deal with children with additional needs. I mean, I think some of the cases we've looked at, and they're in a report, and we have had other ones since then, and we're due to publish a health report which touches on the issues of restraint within a special school, but it was focused on occupational therapy provision and over prescription and restraining chairs and their use in a school. So we will be publishing that before the end of this month, and it does point towards, you know, restrictive practices in schools. So I think, has the issue gone away? I don't think so. I think there is a need for training. I think there's a lack of understanding, and there's an absolute need for staff to understand what is appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Yeah, and I wanted to come in on training now that you've just mentioned it. And we heard from experts in the field of children with special needs and the use of de-escalation or therapeutic techniques rather than, you know, restrictive practices. And I'm wondering, has there been any rise in the rates of training of teachers and so on in regard to these particular techniques? Or, you know, has nothing happened? New guidance has been introduced, but that's it.
So in terms of I suppose, would we as an office have detailed knowledge of what training individual schools have provided or what the EAA has rolled out? No, but I think we wouldn't have that detailed knowledge. but we certainly see complaints to us that indicate a need for training and a continuing need for training. So again, if you're asking me, have we seen through our work an improvement, and that a lot of training has been rolled out to help those staff know how to manage challenging behaviours and deal appropriately with them, we're certainly not seeing that coming through in the complaints that we get thus far. Now,
you're not aware of any particular initiatives to ensure that teachers are trained in the use of different techniques and de-escalation?
No, and I suppose if they were doing that and it was working well, then we wouldn't hear. If you know what I mean, because it would be being successful. We tend to hear about things when they go wrong. So I'd say the rollout of training and how that has gone across the school system wouldn't be something that we would necessarily know about unless there was a briefing from, the Education Authority or the department about the rollout of that. And I say we tend to hear about when things go wrong.
What influence would you have in terms of encouraging greater professional training in that particular field? Do you have any influence?
So in terms of our office, we would always advocate for the training that people need to be able to deliver an effective service, and that is something we support. So those de-escalation techniques, those more supportive techniques rather than moving towards restraint, would fit with the principles of good administration and the way we would approach. So certainly training was a key element of the issues we looked at when we looked at restrictive practices, and it's certainly something that we could look at if the committee was minded to have a discussion with the Ombudsman around, is there something that our office could do to facilitate further and better training in the school system to support a change towards those more supportive approaches. It's certainly something we'd be happy to look at and engage with the committee on.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
David, you're in next.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm going to touch on something that probably is informed by a case that has come to me, and obviously do my best to make sure that I don't point in any direction as to where that is. But can I just confirm, so if someone feels that they have faced a grave injustice of maladministration, and in this particular case I've only heard one side of the discussion, if you will, but has reported that to a Board of Governors, feels that is taking a huge amount of time to go through. That timeliness piece, and I think I've seen it within your briefing there somewhere, I can't find at the moment, but that is something that you could look into. And if it is, what kind of time range would you say is appropriate? And I know it might be different for different processes, but at which stage, if they had not heard anything despite looking for it, would you think it's appropriate to come to you?
Certainly, while an individual is expected to complete the complaints process for a public body, the Ombudsman maintains a discretion where that has not happened, and that is for the scenario that you allude to, where there to some extent has been a frustration of the process, so they can't get a response. So certainly if it is going on for months, I would think that they should approach us. Now, what we might do in the first instance is ask the school to respond and give them a time scale to respond. And if they don't do that, then we would look to see whether we should use our discretion and accept that. And we would do that quite a lot across the public bodies. Say to them, look, you haven't responded to this complaint. Give us a commitment that you'll do it within a certain period of time. Explain that to the complainant, and if they don't get it, then they can come back and have a further discussion with us about whether we should then accept that. In our role in trying to resolve a complaint or investigate, it's always better to have the position of the public body set out in a response to the complainant and the issues that they resolve. But if they can't get it, then we do have the authority to progress with that.
No, I appreciate that, and that probably leads me on to the next issue. In this case, I received correspondence from the person who wasn't directly involved but was communicating on behalf of someone, but also from then a leader in sort of teaching unions and so on, who had been involved as well. And there was clearly, they felt when I said that you had a role in this that I had either been dishonest or confused about the issue, and that in itself showed me that there is confusion out there about what exactly the route of complaints is, and route to yourself, and when you can get involved. What communications do you undertake, or could you undertake, with whether it be parents, governors, school staff, school leaders, teaching unions, to ensure that as many of those who may want to come to yourself as possible understand that route to yourself? And if there isn't enough happening, and I understand it may be a resource issue as much as anything else, would you consider having conversations with the department around how that could be done?
So I'll start to this, but I'll bring Julie in terms of the team that she manages and the work we do. So certainly we have engaged in the past with the National Union of Head Teachers Northern Ireland branch, so they're fully aware of us and what we do. There are some restrictions on our role, so if it's an internal issue about teachers and their dissatisfaction and so on, we can't look at that. This is about individuals, so children and parents, families, and their interaction with the school. But I mean, as any public body in a school is no different. They're required to signpost to us, so that's a statutory requirement set out in the Act, to make people aware of the right to come to us at the end of the complaints process. Does it always happen? No. And we, as soon as we see that, we remind them of their statutory obligation to signpost. We've had recent engagement with the Department of Education and ETI around our role at a senior level to make sure, again, that they're fully aware. We had quite considerable engagement with the EA at the time they issued new guidance to schools on how to manage complaints. I'm sure there's more we could do. I'm just going to hand you over to Julie to see if we've done anything in particular or what we could do.
Just before you do with the chair's discretion, can I just clarify then? So for school, so for employees off the school,
yeah,
if they have advanced, if there is a process involving them and they don't feel that they have got appropriate answers in due course, they don't have recourse to come to yourselves on that if it's not timely?
Only if it's in their role as a parent of a child in the school, not as an employee.
Okay, well that's
so that's specifically restricted. We up until 2016 there was an authority for us to look at such issues. In 2016, when the legislation was modernised, that was only available to basically public sector employees, and the feeling was that that wasn't appropriate and that such matters were for the employment tribunal. So it is really about the children, their education, their well-being, and the engagement with parents and families.
Yeah, and just to pick up on the engagement piece, so we've a wide-ranging programme of engagement, which would include everything from large-scale public events such as Balmoral or Pride, where we'll have a presence and engage with the public and try and raise awareness about the office. As well, we use social media and publications such as the Case Digest, which was shared with you. Yes. Obviously, there's a lot more we could do to try and reach everybody who needs to know about us. Sean had mentioned the Complaint Standards Project, which is the 3-year plan to create a common set of complaints handling procedures across all public bodies. Education will be one of the key sectors that we will do that work with. So when their turn comes, as it were, there will be extensive engagement with families and parents at that stage to learn a bit more about what are the barriers they're finding when it comes to making a complaint, and what would good complaints handling look like from their experience of somebody who's having to access that. So we have a big focus on making a really accessible, streamlined and efficient complaints process for families so that they can recognise what good complaints handling should look like, which will enable them to identify sooner in the process, this isn't going the way it should do, this is taking too long, I now know what action I can take next. And I think to pick up on your issue around the timescales, the schools complaints handling,
very briefly,
the complaints handling procedures should have a timescale within it, so the family should be able to identify whether those timescales have been met or not. Yeah.
We don't have time for a follow-up,
unfortunately. Just for because we'll have, in terms of when we come to it at the end, I think, because I may well have been the one that was confused around who could be, but I think actually it's probably something I'd be keen to write to the department to ask if they could map for different sets of people.
I would agree. I think the mapping that complaint process and the departmental powers that sort of overlay that, I think we absolutely should do that. So I'm in agreement. Michelle, I'll bring you in here next.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for your time so far. So what engagement do you with the digest that you've provided there, the Case Digest for schools, do you have engagement within the department after that, and do you look for the department to engage with what kind of trends and things that are coming through from the information that you're gathering? Is that something you do proactively with them?
Well, I'll start and then you finish. So I'll start, Chair, and then So in terms of statistics about complaints and what they are, our understanding is that beyond what we're producing, that is not collected across the board. Is that your understanding, that schools aren't required to report their complaints either through a managing authority and back to the department, so that there isn't? Now, one of the things that we're going to require through the complaint standards is the collection and publication of data around complaints and the analysis of that, and then looking at themes and trends and see how you drive improvement through that. So, Julie, you want to maybe just pick up on that and the complaint standards?
Yeah, so in terms of complaint standards, one of the requirements will be an expectation that public bodies record and publish their complaints data. So some public bodies do that already. So the Trust, for example, you can go online and see the volume of complaints, what were the trends and patterns, what had increased or decreased. That, as far as we're aware, does not exist for the education sector. So some of the universities or the department might publish some complaints data, but that's a bit of a vacuum in terms of individual schools. So we know what comes to us and we can analyse that, but as a proportion of parents who actually made a complaint in the first instance, because that data is not available, we don't know whether that was most of the families made their way to us or whether actually that was a very tiny number. We anticipate that it's probably a tiny number make their way to us in terms of who actually made a complaint to a school.
So it's kind of limited, I guess, in how much it could guide the department, because you're only reporting what you get and there's nothing happening elsewhere. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of, you provided us figures there with things that have gone to like the full investigation. In terms of, again, managing some idea of what the themes are within schools, do you have or capture the data on those that don't make it to the full investigation? And is that something that we can see, or is that shared with the department if it's not in the digest itself?
So certainly in terms of what people say to us when they come to us, we have that data and we collect it and we can analyse it. Say in early July, we met with the senior leadership team of the Department of Education, including the ETI, who on occasion we do communicate directly with where we see things that concern us, and we ask them to pick it up as part of their inspection or engagement with a particular school. So have we routinely been sharing information with the department on the themes and trends in education? Probably not, because the volume, 100 odd complaints a year, probably less than that in terms of schools, you would need to analyse over a number of years to get a meaningful number. So from my experience looking at health where they publish data, we get probably about 5% of complainants will make their way to us. Either they have become exhausted with the process because it takes far too long and far too much emotional energy, and they have too many other challenges sometimes. So only a very small proportion of what is going on is getting to us in the first place. So as Julie has alluded to, it would be much better if we had a more complete set of data from the front end of that. So those providers of education who were capturing, either publishing themselves or ideally feeding it back into a central place, and that data was being made available for fuller analysis.
When you uphold a complaint and you make recommendations, then how do you ensure that those recommendations are followed and implemented?
So I'll start, and then you could maybe do some of the work you've been doing more recently. So
just ask for briefly here.
Yeah, I'll do it really briefly. So yes, we
it's
follow
important
up.
stuff. It's just time is not on our side.
So we follow up at the time, and we ask. So we set a time scale. Sometime after that, we'll go back and ask for evidence that those things. So if it's training, review of policy, apology, usually as a recommendation, we'll make. We ask them to provide that evidence to us. And Julie had just done some work around.
Yes, my team have been looking at the evidence that we hold within our management system to look at whether those have been complied with within the expected timescale, whether there's been any unacceptable delay, trying to identify areas where we might need to improve. So what we'll be doing going forward is working closely with the investigation team to identify either really good practice in terms of sometimes people go over and above what we've asked, so we can, that's important learning to share with other people, but also to identify possibly where maybe they haven't been completed in full, and also maybe just to do some more detailed work, for example with the school, to say we recommend that you did this, did it have the desired outcome? So did the training actually change practice? Have you been able to update the training? Was the training available? And just capturing a little bit more what the impact of that has been, rather than a purely compliance, yes they did it, so we're going to find out, and then what did it change practice, were things better as a result of that? Yeah.
Is that the same if you make a recommendation to ETI that they need to look at a particular school? Would you follow that up to check, well what did ETI do with that?
No, I mean, we would leave it to them now. Say on the occasions we have done it, to be fair to ETI, they have written back to us to tell us they were going to pick it up. So I say we wouldn't compel them. Our ultimate sanction, if any public body doesn't comply, tells us they're not going to do it, or we find that they don't do it, is back to the Assembly. So there's a power to do what's called a special report. So I mean, it would be for each committee then decide whether they wanted to hear evidence around that as to why the public body hasn't introduced or implemented the recommendations we've made.
Just conscious in terms of some issues that have come to the committee that the ETI element might be quite relevant in terms of, you know, we get stuff around individual schools. It's not always appropriate for us to deal with that. But if we know that power is there to recommend ETI intervention, that's helpful information. So, Cathy.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking back to, I suppose, the restraint and seclusion, there was a number of recommendations that you have made to the department, and you mentioned there that you'd met with them. Have you had feedback on those, or do you have any indication as to the department taking those on board? Because there does seem to be some very solid recommendations there in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the statutory guidance that's been developed, it does seem to have addressed most of the issues of concern that we had. I think possibly the piece that we would like to see a little bit more work around would be the voice of the child in those restraint processes. So it's good that schools now must have a policy. EA are developing a model policy, so that's good learning for schools. There'll be better communication, hopefully, as a result of the guidance with families, and more recording and sharing information with families. But I think probably that piece around the child's preferences and what their experience has been, we'd like to see that built into the recording as well. And also just, it might not have been in that recommendation, but we're also pushing to see better equalities data in Northern Ireland, so recording other relevant information, such as did the child have a special educational need, and a bit more detail about the issue. And again, that's around schools being able to analyse their own data to identify trends and patterns. And again, if that can then be aggregated and shared with the department, that'll give us a much better picture of what's happening in Northern Ireland, instead of it all being sitting at school level.
Yeah. And again, just on that then, about it sitting at school level, there it said the department should consider like a summary being sent, or the schools should send a summary of what's happened, how it's combated, what the outcome has been. What is the view, of that? Is that so that then the department stroke EA can intervene, or just that they have that data? What is the purpose then?
It's around data and learning and improvement, so having that deeper understanding of what the situations are, what worked in that situation, and what was the impact of the intervention. And it's about sharing learning and improvement.
And has that been?
I didn't see it in the guidance, so that is something we could pick up. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe something to pick up as an action arising from this session as well, I think, to engage with the department on the development of that guidance. So, yeah.
The case study, the longer case study in the restrictive practices guidance, one of the very concerning things about that complaint was the mother said she complained to 50 organisations before she came to us. So that lack of certainty about where to go to. But also she had raised it with the managing authority and the EA and the child protection team within the EA, and nobody had acted. So it was quite frightening that, given what that mother was saying about what was going on in that school, that nobody reacted to it, to protect the best interests of the child and make sure that practice ceased. And I say we tend to be quite far down the road afterwards. So I think that more proactive approach, which is also about the summary going in, that the school are saying we had this issue, we're letting you know we've dealt with it, and here's how we've dealt with it, is actually a very positive thing, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's that issue that we see all the time of a reluctance, I think, of EA or department to intervene, because schools are independent largely. They are independent entities with their own boards of governors, and there's a sense of that's not for us. But there are certain issues that I think as a committee we would like to see as immediate red flags that go up, and that there is some mechanism to not to go straight from 0 to 100, but just to, is there a need to have a look at this? So I think that's helpful. Okay, Cathy. Peter, next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Most of my questions have been answered, so I've got a really easy one for you. Page 14, you refer to other educational body. Are you referring to EOTIS in those numbers? Is that what that is? Page 14 of the briefing, key themes in NICCY school complaints and investigations. Right at the end, because You've got a list of nursery schools, primary schools, post-primary, special, universities and colleges, and other educational bodies. University and colleges would obviously be the Department of Economy. I was wondering whether other educational bodies, you were referring to EOTIS there?
EA, CCMS, so they are bodies within our jurisdiction. So there are a whole range of
LBs of the department?
So they're not, we have them in our system as standalone. They're not, we don't class them as ALBs of the department. We would hold department complaints separate to this. We would report them under government department. But EA, CCMS and similar organisations, we will record them within our education statistics.
That's really interesting. Thank you. It's me.
Oh, it was straightforward there.
Really good.
easy one to finish on. That's been a really helpful session. I suspect we may want to hear from you again. I think both on restraint and seclusion and on school governance and the complaints processes within that. So been a really helpful evidence session. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the Ombudsman would welcome to come back when she's available, certainly to do any work with the committee.
That's great and good to know. Thank you. So while witnesses are being just shown out, where we're fairly short on time, but I think there were some actions there that I think are worth highlighting. I'll pick up on governance first, and then we have some stuff on restraint and seclusion. So I think on the governance, I'm happy to take a view from members very quickly, but I would like to see, I think, David's proposal. I'm very happy to propose that we write to the department and ask them effectively to provide their map of what the complaints process should look like from lowest level through to when NICCY or
different groups of stakeholders.
For again, including employees, parents, members of boards of governors, the whole spectrum. So I think that would be helpful. Alongside that, and it's whether or not we think this is a research paper perhaps, or whether this is something for the department, but I would actually like to see mapped out what is the legislative power that exists both with the department, with the EA, in terms of how to address issues of governance that may be brought to their attention. So at what point does it sit with the boards of governors to manage issues with internal complaints, and at what point is there an intervention? What powers exist? And how often are they used? And actually a view from the department, do they feel they require additional powers in this space? But that could sit as a research paper or a request from the department. I'll just put on record I have a similar request in writing from the department which has never received a response, so if they're listening, it would be good to have that. But I do think to help us understand how best to deal with parents and also when you hear from principals who maybe flag up that they're having issues in managing things within their own boards, or individual board of governor members. And I say this declaring the interest as a member of a board of governor, but I think in the interest of openness and transparency it would be good to understand that. So do members have a preference around that? Is that something that we think would be helpful, research paper or a letter to the department?
I think initially asking the department leaves the other option open in future, but it also means if we can get a response from the department, it means that if you have the department or minister or whoever in front of us in due course, we can ask them about that as well.
Any contempt with that, or we contemporary right to the department along those lines? On restraint and seclusion, I think just as a very straightforward action, I think we should be writing to the department at least seeking a written update on where their work at is in developing that final statutory guidance. It's been quite quiet on that. I haven't heard anything coming through on it, so I would be content to propose that. Is there anything else arising from any of the questioning around that we think we'd like a bit more detail on?
Just in relation to that issue, Chair, I mean, guidance is okay, but if the sort of professional training doesn't go along with it, it's of little value, and we need to see some evidence of an initiative to train teachers in these de-escalation techniques.
Like the issue of CPD and access to training just comes up on so many issues, but this one is so critical because of the potential harms that are at play. So I think some detail and any work around developing a training programme would be welcome. So happy to add that in.
Clarify in the letter that you're writing, we're going to ask about the kind of the different levels of complaint and what the powers are. There was a bit of a discussion around the nature of data collection around complaints. Could we get asked about that as well?
Yeah, I think we can add that into the letter to the department also. Yeah, I'm happy with that if members are content.
Yeah, there were 2 points. There was NICCY would like to hear more of the voice of the child in reporting and then would like more information to be collated rather than sitting at school level so that it can be aggregated for learning and future practice.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's just once it's mapped, as we were talking about, whether we highlight with some concerns that even if there is a clear route, that this isn't being appropriately communicated to. There's clear confusion out there.
There's mixed messaging all over the show, yes, without
everyone
a doubt.
in terms.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that occurred to me was just that to speak in sensitive terms about some of the experience that stakeholders have brought, you might want to have an informal meeting with NICCY.
Yeah, and that's something I think to consider down the line in terms of forward work planning. I think probably content to see what comes back in correspondence, but I think then there's certainly a willingness to engage in an informal briefing might be helpful on some of those issues. But are we content to proceed as suggested?
See, just a really small point, just on that, in terms of the school sending the summary to the EA and the department, can we just get clarity as to whether that is included in the current guidance, or is that something that's planning to be? It was one of NICCY's recommendations.
Yeah, I think that was. I knew there was a specific in there. So in terms of that question around that summary, I think is we can ask them directly if that's under development with the new guidance. So, yeah. Okay. So we've covered a lot there. There's quite a lot arising from that, and I think we definitely should be looking to hear from NICCY again. So look, we have run over time slightly, so we will conclude the meeting fairly quickly. We are in the fortunate position that correspondence is very short today, so that's item 9, and refer members to pages 153 and 154. Just 2 items of correspondence. Item 9.1. It's sorry to revert back to the start of our meeting. It's correspondence from an individual regarding the Minister of Education meeting with the Loyalist Communities Council. I would propose that we write back to the correspondence indicating that we have already sent correspondence on that issue and that we can share any response with them when it arrives. Is that right, Michelle?
I propose to note that it's disappointing we didn't get a response to our correspondence for this meeting. I know there was some stuff yesterday in the media around the minutes being publicised through the media, but we haven't received anything ourselves, so I hope we have that for the next meeting.
Yeah, I do hope that comes through quickly, because yes, I did note there was a media statement went out, but we didn't get a response.
The Minister actually wrote to me and said that the minutes of the meeting are being placed in the library. I'm not sure whether they're now.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have a bit of a backlog at our end as well. So
okay, so perhaps there's correspondence there.
Yeah.
Okay. We will see what arrives for next week then. But are we agreed to deal with item 9.1 on that basis? Agreed? Agreed. Item 9.2, it's an invitation to the launch of the Centre for Public Policy and Administration on Friday the 25th at 9 a.m. At Queen's University Belfast. I mean, I'm really happy for members to note that for their diary. It's unfortunately not one that I'm free to attend, so if there's interest to go through the clerk and that, if anyone's interested in attending that event. Are we agreed? Okay, so that just brings us to item 10, which is forward work programme. So a couple of things, and I will be brief on this. So I appreciate there have been maybe a few concerns, maybe sort of back and forth through myself to raise maybe some concerns around the amount of time RSE inquiry is likely to take and squeezing out other matters. I would just want to sort of draw attention on the forward work plan, and I'm mindful of trying to strike a balance in this space. We currently, not all locked in with a date, but certainly on the agenda, we do look to have a budget briefing, a briefing from RAISE, briefing on early education and childcare and SEND transformation. And beyond that, we also have the audit office and sporting bodies scheduled to come in. My sense would be that other than that, we may be limited on other slots in the forward work plan. So I suppose I would put it out here that now is your opportunity. If there's a glaring omission there that you feel we should be looking at, it's probably now is the time to raise it, as I suspect by next week you might see the forward work plan quite heavily populated. So it would be I think certainly from the clerk and the team's perspective in terms of scheduling things, it really would be now is the time to say if there's anything other than those departmental briefings that I've raised and anything else that was mentioned there, just to flag it.
Do you want to flag it now, Chair? Or
when I say now, definitely mean now, yes. Because I think
tell me now.
I do have to emphasise for the clerk and for the team, it's quite a logistical exercise balancing the normal work of committee with the inquiry plus some of the stuff happening outside of normal scheduling. So I think it is good to get a sense it would be more difficult if next week somebody raised, I actually think we need to be hearing about X and all our slots are filled. So it's important we would get that now.
You mentioned earlier.
Sorry, just Peter, did you have something? That
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Now you put me under extraordinary pressure. It's really SEN capital, so new SEN schools. So we know what the trajectory and a lot of this stuff was. I was certainly talking to another committee member about this week. We know that there's a lot of demand. I'd like to see some. We're talking about forward work plans. What is the department EA's forward work plan in terms of what they think the projections are going to be for next year and the following year in terms of children with statements, and what provision is there in place? Because this is always something, I certainly have seen it from the department's perspective.
Specifically capital, Peter? Is that
capital?
Yeah,
I'm talking
yes.
about. I'm talking about rooms, because it really follows on from a really good question Pat asked the Ombudsman, and I caught the most of it, but it was really around, levels of complaints around restraint in mainstream. And, I suppose in the back of my head I'm sort of thinking, because there's so much pressure in some special schools, now some kids perhaps who had situations where they might end up in mainstream with specific help, was there something around that? But anyway, that would be one in terms of saying capital.
Could I make a suggestion on that? Because I think it's a really good point. I mean, I think if we're seeking a budget briefing fairly urgently, would it be reasonable to say that in capital that we would like that to be a specific inclusion in the budget briefing around that, and then we also have SEN transformation in? I would hope that we could deal with that. Are we content that those two briefings would cover that? Because I think it is. The forward planning in terms of the capital investment for this is crucial. So I think that is a well worth raising.
Do you want me to keep going? So I'm not sure, maybe the department will cover this off when it comes in. I'd like to see something around Fair Start. I don't know whether or not we've considered bringing
the RAISE program.
Yeah, the RAISE program, which I think will cover Fair Start, so educational underachievement. We have that there yet.
Yes.
If you're content.
That's not just one. Is that
that it incorporates an update on Fair Start?
As far as I understand, and I might be wrong, RAISE is an aspect
outworking of a recommendation of Fair Start. I think we can I think we probably need to be smart to try, if we can get Fair Start in on that briefing to get an overview of that. I would be.
Is it individual programs under Fair Start that you want to follow?
Well, actually, I like a sort of more of a briefing as to where we are. And some of the money will come in whenever we get the spend profile from the department. But where is Fair Start? How far along are we? I know we're behind in some aspects. RAISE is one specific area of that, but I think probably I'm always looking for things on this committee that we can all agree on and push on. And I think something like educational underachievement is certainly one of those things, rather than things that the committee always has to divide on because we have different views on it. So I think that Fair Start's pretty important. I would certainly, if you could bring some of the panel members back in, and we can have a chat with them. I don't mind, how it's done, but you're asking for how we populate forward work planning. I think that would be useful.
No, so if we can make sure that is noted, and then for next week we can see where the scope is to bring that in. So that's helpful, Peter. Michelle, you'd indicated.
Well, I think Kathy mentioned earlier on about getting early start.
Early years.
Yeah, that'd be really good.
Early years, hopefully, had already been noted.
Yeah, I've already messaged the Jallo about that. So
just on the back of that, and again, I know how packed it is, but when we're talking about childcare in early years, there are a few kind of maybe omissions that we mentioned, and there would be the community and voluntary sector in early years and the Irish medium early years. So I don't know whether that can all be in one. I know that's a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want to be, in terms of managing expectations, I think we are up against it between now and Christmas. I also don't want to lose sight. We absolutely want to have the minister in, and I think we don't want to fill our work plan and then not have that opportunity. So I'll leave that with yourself as clerk to take that away, but with the caveat that not all of this may be deliverable, but we'll do what we can.
We're talking about early years as well, on different stakeholders, Department of Health as well. We may not be able to get them in, but we're certainly still waiting on the stuff around, the minimum standards and the consultations around ratios and stuff. So we haven't had any update on that. So I don't know if that's one to write to the department on, or if it's worth talking to them about that aspect of.
We had raised before about a joint meeting with the health committee as well.
I think in after Christmas, I think a concurrent meeting with health is something we absolutely should be taking forward. I think especially in the space of SEN, but also early years, the two cross over without a doubt. So we can keep that in mind. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? Deputy Chair, just check in with you. Is there anything at all that you would want?
No, all those issues are fine to me.
No, that's fine. And the only other thing I would just add there then is we do have one final sort of out of the normal cycle of meetings, which is the youth engagement session around RSE. So just to note that on the forward work plan in terms of the date, we have that for the Tuesday the 15th of October. So if I'd ask maybe if we could get a diary invite out for that, but just for members to note that that's the only one which I think we really is probably going to need to take place out of ours, so we can get an appropriate range of young people in to engage with. But at this stage, are we happy to endorse the forward work plan as drafted? We agreed?
Yep.
And that just takes me to item 11. Do we have any other business? Nope. And then item 12, so that is just the date and time of next meeting, which is Wednesday the 9th of October, 2 p.m, room 29, Parliament Buildings, and then leaves me to put the question at the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Committee Room 29, sound. Committee Room 29, sound. Committee Room 29, sound.